All right, guys. Welcome to Ember, the online think tank from locals. We're here to talk about big ideas and maybe some not so good ideas as well. We're going to talk about a lot of not so good ideas today, I'll tell you what. But trying to talk about the issues facing our society so that we can come up with solutions. I'm Karlyn Borysenko, kb.locals.com. I complain on the internet for a living, and maybe everyone else can go around and introduce themselves.
All right, I am James Darian, co-founder of Ember, founder of computationconstruct.locals.com, and I identify as a West Asian, being that I am Armenian. Just want to get that out there because I was accused of having white privilege, so no, you bigot.
Well done, well done.
I'm Kevin of Engineering Politics. I'm a conservative content creator, and what I've been doing lately is more like book reviews. So I don't consider myself the smartest person ever, but I do like to read other really smart people and try to figure out how they're thinking. So that's my interest lately. And as to how I identify, I don't know. I always make the joke that I don't know if it's too crude for this, so feel free to cut it out. But I'm 100% German, so. My only street cred on that front, on the oppression front, is my great uncle did die in Auschwitz. He fell off a watchtower, and so I got a little bit of cred there.
Heard that joke before.
It's a joke, guys. I know Truman heard that joke.
I knew it's all right.
Like,
yes.
The way I heard it was fell off a guard tower and broke his neck. But anyway, yeah, so that aside, my name's Truman. I don't really know why I'm here. I make custom American Doll clothes on Etsy, and also sweaters for little dogs, pets, assorted things like that. And so I'm just here to provide, that perspective of the type of person who does that. I also happen to have a website, returntoreason.locals.com, where I do things other than, talk about my American Girl doll obsession. And it's mostly politics and cultural stuff and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's me.
You're here for your fashion sense, Truman, because
that's
God knows
me. I'm having a bad hair day today, so I'm not sure I'm even going to be able to fulfill that role. But
wow.
Yep.
All right. So the topic that I wanted to focus on today is essentially I believe we're in a moment in time when we maybe have 1 or 2 years to turn around how much the woke have taken over our culture, our institutions, particularly when it comes to academia, what's going on with the schools. Critical race theory has infiltrated schools at all levels at this point. It's infiltrated teacher education programs. The Biden administration is now trying to solidify this through the Department of Education. And I think that our time is running out to beat back critical race theory and the woke in our society. Now, the problem is, I don't see people fighting back. What I see is the Republican Party basically going back to where they were before Trump. And I had a lot of hope for the Republican Party. I essentially became a Republican after CPAC when I saw this data that said 95% of the Republican Party still supports Donald Trump, sees Donald Trump as the leader of the party. Donald Trump gave a great speech at CPAC. And then a couple months later, Donald Trump has basically endorsed my Rhino Republican governor, Chris Sununu, for Senate, even though Chris Sununu supports critical race theory. We're seeing the Republican Party start to rally around Liz Cheney. And although there are people that are fighting back, like Scott Pressler, I think is doing really great work to try to primary these Rhino Republicans, I just don't see the willpower to do it. And so the question that I want to start with today is, am I incorrect that the Republican Party seems to be more comfortable in being controlled opposition to the Democratic Party rather than actually fighting for a vision of America that is based on freedom and liberty and all of the things they profess to care about?
Can I add on to what you just said there? Since I think you and I are the resident, not, at least traditionally not conservative. So I everything you just said, I totally agree with. And, it's a little bit, one of the things we talked about last week is the way this, progressive, I call it far left orthodoxy ideology progresses. The way Michael Malice describes it in his book, The New Right, is, the way conservatives have traditionally opposed the left is if the left wants 10 and the conservatives want 0, they compromise at 5. And then it makes them look like the good guys. But then the next iteration is not, again, from 5 to 10, it's from 5 to 15. So then they compromise at 10. And so they keep moving things to the left because, like what you said, it's more of a controlled opposition than actually doing anything. The picture I had in my mind, I was thinking about this last night, was like, if there's the inside of a house, and every time the Democrats, are the ones in that house and they control how that house looks, they'll start projects, they'll start putting up some wallpaper, maybe start, knocking a wall out over here and renovating the house. And then whenever the conservatives are living in the house, they just stand around going, God, that wallpaper is god awful. That's ugly. I really hope they don't finish that project. They left the tools here, but God forbid, they really should not put the rest of that wallpaper up. And then when they don't do anything, they leave, and then the progressives go right back to doing the things. And the Republicans, whenever they're in power, they don't actually do anything to undo the damage that the left does. And so, yeah, I don't know what it is. I just wanted to add that to what you said there. I don't know if it's their content being controlled opposition. I think probably a lot of it has to do with just a political class generally. One of the problems with the programs that the left creates is they automatically, make it where it's very difficult for the right to like something like Social Security would be a good example, or Medicaid or, Medicare. If you look at our national budget, 2/3 of it goes to entitlement programs every single year. People complain about the military, spending, for example, but it's like 67% and rising of how much of our national budget goes to things like welfare, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those kinds of things. And it's very difficult to undo that because now the people on the right have constituents that are, benefiting from those programs. And so I just think they don't have the spine to rip the Band-Aid off with some of these things. And so I don't know if it's a controlled opposition or that maybe they just don't know how. They're interested in being in politics for their whole life. So they're thinking about reelection and not about being in there for one term and making the hard decisions. I don't know what it is, but there is something that seems to be incredibly impotent on the Republican side, as I see it as well. And it's very frustrating because they're all we have right now. That's the problem. They're all we have right now. And they cannot get their act together to figure out one, to what your point is, Karlyn, I don't think they understand the CRT stuff. I was talking to a buddy of mine who's starting to actually wake up to this stuff. He's asking questions and he was like, how do we get people to understand it? How come more people don't understand it? I said, this is heavy stuff. It's hard to understand and it hijacks language. And so I don't know if it's that the Republicans don't understand it or they're just don't want to piss off their constituents, or it's just more comfortable to do the establishment thing, and the Pelosi's and Schumers and, the Mitch McConnells and whatever can, pat each other on the back and, basically be on the same team in a lot of ways. I don't know, but there is a real problem here in terms of it doesn't seem like they are in their current form the answer to this. They're not the answer to, this crazy ideology taking over the country. Anyway, so that's just wanted to add that observation on there. And I think the other two, are more historically conservative, so maybe they can correct, something that we got wrong. But
yeah, well, I would say that they definitely are controlled opposition, and a lot of it I think has to do with they're not willing to admit, first of all, that 90% of legislation is based on emotion. They are not actually they act like they're the logical party. The Republicans aren't the logical party.
No.
I would say there is no logical party. And the problem is so many of the constituents have completely bought into we're so logical. We use our mind. We don't make decisions based on our emotion. Yeah, you fucking do. Pardon the language. But I have brought up the idea of cutting back Social Security to older Republicans, and they all freak the hell out. Just like, what are you talking about? That is a leftist program. That is a leftist program that's completely bankrupting our country. It's going to harm our children for generations to come. Are you saying that that the children of the future should suffer for you? It's like, I paid into it. It's like, Yeah, well, you also paid into a bunch of other stuff you're not using. It's just another tax. Get over it. But they're not willing to admit it. They aren't willing to admit it. They're not willing to take the consequences for their decisions and for their bad leadership. There is a serious issue with consequences, and I think if you look not only at the Republican leadership, if you look at Republican media, specifically if you look at Fox or any of the other traditional ones, I mean, it was a good month-long period of Republicans laughing at CNN having the headline "Fiery but peaceful protests," when on freaking Martha's show there were literal explosions happening on screen at another riot, and they were, I will say, it was white people in the background who were rioting, and then immediately they said, "Oh, they're just slightly explosive protests." And I'm just like, what? Pardon my language for this again. You might want to cover your kids' ears. What the actual fuck? This is the exact issue every conservative was throwing their arms in the air. And not even just conservatives, moderates, everyone who saw it and saw this on CNN and knew that these were actually riots, and that they were completely screwing over the definition of what a protest is, because protests are by definition peaceful. Riots are when protests lose their peace. And then the mainstream conservative media has the gall to say that, and then without doing any kind of confirmation, just after the explosion happens, they just repeatedly say at least 5 times in the next minute that was not a bomb. They did nothing to confirm that. They did nothing to go. They didn't go over it. As a matter of fact, the explosion went off and they panned the camera away. They walked off a bit and panned the camera away. So it is completely ridiculous. I call them CNN light. I call them the right-wing CNN, because they do the exact same thing and they just change the language a little bit. They use slightly different words so that it'll appeal to the more conservative mindset. But otherwise, other than maybe Tucker Carlson and maybe a few of their contributors, they're basically just that. But the thing is, those people are just the red meat. That's the thing. Yeah, they have Tucker Carlson, but he's basically a shield for them. He's the guy who goes up and he says all this stuff, and they're like, "See, we are actually on your side. We are actually with it. We are actually conservative and wanting to push these values." Just no, he is your cover man.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say here, as the, I suppose, card-carrying Republican, that I'm the one here who has to push back on the premise. So here we go. You're totally right. You're totally right. The problem is, and now I understand coming from the other side, because, again, my background is 2016. I didn't vote for Donald Trump because I was one of these people. It's this does not look like my principles, because I thought my principles were looking conservative and not being conservative.
Exactly.
Donald Trump did not look the part at all, but governing wise, he certainly played the part. And, we think of this type of conservatism as rhino conservatism, where we look at President Bush and he's really conservative in demeanor, very, very nice guy, seems like he'd be fun to hang out with, but his governing policy was cutting taxes, and that's about it. He grew the size of government. He did everything that conservatives rail against. So what I think conservatives need to do, and something they're not very good at doing, is understanding political reality. They don't understand the political reality. And sometimes, when you think that you're standing against these things because you're standing for principle, the problem is the principles have been shifting within the party. Right. They've exchanged, conservative principles of freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for rhino principles, which is basically limited to cutting taxes. It's about it. So I think they need to recalculate the risks of, for a good example, this is Caitlyn Jenner running in California, and people not willing to do that because they think that's abandoning their principles. If they give into some sort of transgender narrative, that they're going to lose the battleground sex or something like that, and they have to reassess the risks. It's like, you can actually hold true to your principles and still vote for someone like Caitlyn Jenner and actually start trending in the right direction. I think Karlyn, you had a really good conversation with a couple of people about opening up the Republican Party, not to just this small element of the Christian conservative, but it needs to open up to a wider group that is totally willing to stand for these principles, which really encompasses just about everybody. And it's like 80% of people, I'm pretty sure, if you slap down in front of them, what side stands for what, that 80% of Americans would probably go Republican, because if you actually look at these objective standards, they'd be like, yeah, I can't stand for craziness. I mean, you have the traditional flat earth, what I would call flat earth, individualist type of, independents that are Republican because they're like, the left is too crazy for me. Like, if you have the flat earthers saying that, that's kind of an indicator that the other side might be a little too radical, right? So, and another observation I make from this is, even going to church earlier this morning, I think the biggest bulwark against some of the crazy woke ideology was Christianity at the beginning. But now look at today. Christianity, I think, is one of the leading groups that are actually pushing this stuff. Yep. And, you see it a lot. Now, I feel like I'm a bit more insulated because I normally attend a Catholic church. So it's going to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more traditional. But, you go around everywhere and there's, pride flags hanging up on their signs out there. And it's although I don't think they shouldn't be accepting to other people, it's still against, overtly against the book that they tend to preach. And, when they open up and start pushing for things because they feel like it's their cause of social justice, they replace, the teachings of the religion with social justice, this is what happens. So I see the conservative kind of moving the way that a lot of Christian denominations have been moving, and they're actually supporting it. Not only are they not fighting against it, which they should, because it goes against all of their principles, they actually are starting to support it now.
And I'm actually really glad you brought up Caitlyn Jenner, because Caitlyn Jenner this week was pretty much my final straw with the Republican Party, because when she announced that she was running for governor on Friday, I think, from my perspective, this is the best gift the Republican Party could have ever been given, ever. You have an opportunity for this to completely disrupt the narrative that the left has been pushing for the last 4 years. You have an opportunity to red pill people, not only in the state of California, but nationwide, that are going to be watching this happening. You have an opportunity for the Republican Party to support a trans woman who has always been a conservative all her life, a trans woman, versus the Democratic Party supporting the straight white man. That is a massive red pill moment. And I feel like it was handed to them on a silver
gimme.
A gimme.
Yeah.
It's like a no-brainer. And yeah, I understand that, you need to think about our policies and stuff like that. But like, this is like a gift handed to you on a silver platter. And they're like, nah, not really interested. And they make all these excuses. And I'm sorry, I do not buy any of the excuses that I've heard about why they cannot in any way support Caitlyn Jenner. I don't. I think they're making excuses because she's trans, and they think that supporting her means giving into the trans activists on the left. And it's this absurd thing, because the Republican Party, all they do is push back against what the left is doing. Well, if the trans activists on the left are some of the loudest, then of course we have to oppose all things trans, even if it makes us look like assholes. Even if it makes us look like we are dehumanizing people that are mostly on your team and could actually be a good advocate for you. It blew my mind.
Well, and there's a problem there in that, I mean, it's kind of related. So to kind of marry what you just said with what Kevin said, in that the average Republican voter, I think, does not have a good grasp on the situation we're in right now. They're the people on the Titanic that don't realize there's people who are down below who see the water coming in and they're like, this is bad. And then there's the people up on top who they're told everything's fine, it's okay, or it's not as bad as it seems. And I think the average Republican voter is like that because they're getting their information, frankly, from people like Ben Shapiro in a lot of cases.
Fox
establishment type Republicans who very much control where their outrage should be, where their worry should be, and by virtue of what they ignore, what it shouldn't be. And so the CRT stuff is a great example of that. In that, you mentioned Liz Cheney earlier, and I'm so glad you mentioned this. And I think I brought this up in one of your community Zooms maybe a week or so ago, but I was talking to a buddy of mine he's a veteran, he's a good dude, he's a conservative guy, and this was after church a few weeks ago, and we were just talking about politics, and I said something about how Liz Cheney needed to be primaried out, and he was like, I like Liz Cheney, and I was like, why do you like Liz Cheney? And he's like, what? She's, good about the things I care about. And I was like, dude, she's a rhino. She voted to impeach Trump over January 6th. Like, she is not good for your party. She's not a winner. And he's like, well, she's good on the stuff I care about, guns and abortion. And that's what he said. And it was like a light bulb turned on in my head where I'm like, that's it. The average conservative who might have listened to Rush, who might watch Fox or someone like a Ben Shapiro or something like that, or maybe even some PragerU stuff, they're placated by someone who says the right things about guns and abortion. And that's it. And that's it. And they ask for nothing else. And how is that any different than a person on the left who says the right things about guns and abortion, or like immigration and abortion, and then does nothing else to help? That's why the progressives don't like the establishment Democrats. Because they're like, well, all they're doing is saying the right things about abortion and, maybe guns or race stuff or something like that. And they're paying lip service, but they're not actually doing anything. That's why the progressives hate the establishment Democrats. And I think people like us who are down below and see the water pouring in, after the Titanic hits that iceberg, we understand what's going on. And so it's like we see the establishment people, or the voices, a lot of the main commentators, focusing on the wrong stuff, picking the wrong battles. And like you said, Karlyn, taking things that are like a gimme, like the Caitlyn Jenner thing. It's like, that's a gimme. It is. It makes perfect sense. Here's the litmus test. It's not, is Caitlyn Jenner trans? Is Caitlyn Jenner, what are the policies that Caitlyn Jenner wants to do for trans stuff? Does Caitlyn Jenner want biological males and females to be competing on sports teams? If not, who cares? Who cares? Yeah. Those are the things that they should be focusing on, not this other thing. But I think the one of the problems is that they're forming their opinions based on commentators and memes shared on Facebook that are usually a quote from one of those commentators. And those opinions are usually very surface level, very shallow. And it's, are you good on guns and abortion? And that's it. And they're not doing, and so I don't think they have a good grasp of the situation we're in, because if they did, then they would be demanding from their leaders, you got to do something about this. And this goes back to the point that I've made multiple times before, why the people who I think are traditionally from the left and have woken up to this stuff, why we're some of the loudest voices sounding the alarm, because we know what run-of-the-mill average leftist stuff is. And we know this isn't that. This is a different fight. It's very dangerous. I think the way you prefaced it at the beginning is spot on. We do not have a lot of time left before, a system can only sustain so much damage before it becomes terminal, before it's irreparable, right? And the left is doing damage nonstop with the things that they're doing. And those of us who are from the left are like, we know what's going on. Like, you guys need to wake up to this shit. And there's people on the right who don't. They just think it's this same old culture war. As long as you're saying this thing on guns and abortion, we're good. And they don't understand the fight.
Well, and
tunnel vision.
And not only that, is they expect people like you and I, Truman, to just vote for the Republican by default. This is the fight that I've been having with the Republicans for the last 2 days, is they expect that because I hate the Democrats so much and will never support them again, that I'm going to vote for whoever Republican candidate that they put in front of me. And one of the things that I keep hearing is, well, if you don't like the candidates, then primary them, then primary them, then primary them. Well, that all sounds great, well and good, until you have all these Republicans coming out and saying, well, we don't really think that these MAGA America First candidates can win in the general, because the other guy the rhino has the name recognition. And so we want the guy with the name recognition because we think that's going to win. So the candidate that I might like is not going to win the primary. And then all of a sudden, I'm going to be stuck with a choice between a rhino and a Democrat. And they fully expect that I'm going to vote for the rhino by default. And my contention...
And be glad to do it.
And be glad to do it. And be thrilled. And my contention is, I want them to lose. I would rather they lose and learn a lesson about not taking voters like me and voters like you for granted. Than I would rather have a Democrat in office than a Republican, than a Democrat disguised as a Republican.
Yeah, and I can say from the side of the Republicans looking at this and looking at someone like Caitlyn Jenner and saying, I can't agree to this. This stands against my principles. This is what I'm talking about when you look at political realities. Caitlyn Jenner obviously is okay with transition surgery, not something that I totally like. But what's her opposition? I don't think Caitlyn Jenner is okay with transing kids against the permission of their parents. So already you're trending in the right direction. This is called dealing with a political reality. You're waiting. There's some Republicans waiting for the reincarnation of President Reagan, like that he's going to come back and save the day. And they're just waiting for it. It's the same thing as these leftists waiting for utopia. It's like you're waiting for this dream that is not going to happen. If you're not going to deal in political realities, you're going to continue to lose. So I think it's a big, reality check that the Republican Party, and I think a lot of the followers of the Republican Party, because they've bought into this for so long, because they've been doing it for so long, that they need to understand that they need to re-examine their political calculus. They need to understand that you have to be able to move a bit on what your perfect ideal conditions are to make sure you start trending in the right direction.
But yeah, and that goes back to how they're calibrating that, right? And that's my point about someone like Ben Shapiro. Like, here are just two realities. Okay. One is that people are not the right is not pulling people towards them. The right just has trampoline, whatever it is, people are falling out of a building, they have a thing for them to land on when they're pushed out of the left. But the right is not bringing anyone over. No one's looking at the right who's on the left and going, I want to be there. What ends up happening, and I think Bridget Fetisi does a really good job of writing about this I think this is a piece maybe 2 or 3 years ago about the Democrats. And she describes it as like the bar she always used to go to. And she's like, and now the bar has been taken over by these hipsters that I don't agree with them. And so, I'm now standing out in the street and there's the Republic, the other bar that I never wanted to go to over there. And it doesn't look appealing either. And my point is that the left is pushing people out. The right isn't pulling people over. And so they don't think about that. And I think you're exactly right, Karlyn. They take for granted this idea that there's all these politically homeless people, and I hear even people that I really respect, like Dave Rubin, saying, well, people are waking up to this. It's like, okay, they are, but waking up to the fact that the left is crazy, that's a part of it, but there's a whole lot of other things that have to come after that in terms of what do you do about it? And the right doesn't have, at least the establishment right doesn't have any good answers for it. And then the other part, when I go back, I'm going to pick on Shapiro again here, because their thought leaders are people so after two big moments for me with him to realize okay, this guy is not well calibrated for a lot of these things, or in terms of being a good, outlet for people to be well informed. Whenever he talked about January 6th, he specifically described it as evil. The people who did that were evil. Anyone who was there, went into the Capitol, was evil. And I'm like, what are you talking? You are using the same language that the left uses. What are you doing? There were literal grandmas who walked in just to say they did it and walked out. So they're evil. Like, what are you talking about? And he's also the same guy who said there's nothing irregular about the election. And whenever he played a clip of Ted Cruz on the floor before this stuff happened on the 6th, where Ted Cruz, I thought, very well-spoken, articulated, and said, look, even if you don't agree, even if you don't think there's anything unusual, there's a lot of people that do. And we have an obligation to make them feel heard and to try and comfort them and have some kind of process to address their complaints. And after that clip, Shapiro said, okay, I'm sorry, no, that's wrong. That's dead wrong. Just because a lot of people think something doesn't mean that you have to validate it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. It's the same reason why, the left does not have good answers for go back to student loans, but you still have to listen. You still have to make people feel heard. Yeah. And it's that attitude, this narrow establishment attitude, and that there's the voices on the left, the Anderson Coopers and the Don Lemons and whoever else, Rachel Maddow's, are these establishment people that don't understand shit about average people's lives. And the same voices are shaping the opinions and the concerns of people on the right, of people that do not understand the realities, do not understand what's going on, are not very well connected to average everyday life, to the average everyday issues. And so that's where that Republicans are just as misinformed in a lot of ways. And there's this weird middle ground where there's people who are on the right who kind of waking up and understanding it, people on the left who are pushed out, who are fighting this coalition and are screaming at both sides, telling the left, wake up, this is insane, but also screaming at people on the right, wake up, you got to do something, man. What you've been doing isn't working. But we have to compete with the people who are telling them, no, this is the actual problem. This is the actual problem. We have to compete with the establishment conservatives that have been, I think, misinforming people who serve a purpose. By the way, Ben Shapiro serves a purpose. He's a great place for someone who has been pushed out of the left to learn some of these, principles, to learn that they're not crazy on a lot of these issues. So I'm not saying that there's no utility there, but they are not the right voices to shape the what next, to what the actionable part. They're good at giving you the intellectual tools to inform how you might think about it, at least on a lot of issues. But they're not good at thinking about what practically actionably needs to be done. And so we're fighting a two-front war. We're competing with establishment Republicans. We're competing with the mainstream media. And it's very, very frustrating.
Yeah. And I just want to point out on that, like, Ben Shapiro makes his money by opposing the left. That is how he makes his money. Whether or not the right is in power or the left is in power, Ben Shapiro makes his money by opposing the left. And so he will always have a vested interest in just being controlled opposition for the left. Ben Shapiro's role is not to fix problems. And in fact, if we don't fix this problem with critical race theory, he's going to be sitting on a pile of cash because he's just going to spend the rest of his career complaining about it and not doing anything to fix it.
Exactly. And I think we also have to look at where these people are, where the conservatives are going. And I can say right now from like an anecdotal experience, 10 years ago, maybe like 12 years ago, my mom would listen to CNN as her primary news source. She would read the paper, but she would listen to CNN. A couple years after that, she switched to Fox. Then I spent maybe 3 years every time I would visit her. We would always try to get like one Rubin report or one other kind of podcast or a Tim Pool or something on, maybe like 3 or 4 times a week. Since the election, she has gone completely to be only Fox again. And whenever there's anything that Fox does that really is like very CNN-like or very shifting the windows, then she gets frustrated whenever I point it out or something like that. And I feel like a lot of the Republican constituents are getting like that. They tend to just say, okay, things are getting too complicated. I just want to sit and listen and have something easy. I want to be able to just sit, listen, and have my opinion validated and just take this. And they don't even grasp the fact that every day they're more and more accepting of whatever position the Democrats throw forward, whatever kind of scenario or whatever it is that the Democrats are promoting. That is where the Republicans start from. They don't create their own starting point. And their media does not create their own starting point. Everything is done in relation to wherever the left is. Mm-hmm. If we were talking about the Republicans 10 years ago, then they would still be up in arms about gay marriage, other stuff like this. They would be up in arms about Harry Potter still making the kids believe in witchcraft and all this other mumbo jumbo nonsense.
Pokemon making them believe in evolution, another really smart battle to fight.
Yeah, but it's so freaking stupid. It's specifically designed to make you not think, and I find the conservative base is just so excited to have a chance to not think.
I think the thing that you just said was so brilliant, James, is you said they're doing this just to watch something to have their opinion validated. That's completely correct. They just want someone to say, I agree with you, you're not crazy. And then they're like, oh, thank God. I can keep just watching Fox now because it's going to make me feel good to watch it when the world burns around me.
And they don't even realize that it's shifting their view the entire time. because they do these little linguistic, just like slight turns to say, oh, well, we do need to talk about how racist the police are. It's just like, excuse me, what happened to talking about the cultural reasons that could lead to disparities? What happened to just groups of people are different, and people are, as individuals, are different. Just because you're in a group doesn't mean you're going to act like a part of that group. I mean, we always hear from like the left, and I've been hearing this even on Fox now, like, oh, Black people need to have the talk with their kids about how to interact with the cops. I have had that talk dozens of times with my parents, both every just in general. They would bring it up every so often, like, okay, you remember, every time you see a cop, be friendly, keep your hands on the wheel, don't do any sudden movements, make sure you are polite, show them respect, yada yada yada. Every time, either maybe there was something on TV, or just whenever I was like gonna go do something, like, oh, in case you get pulled over, make sure you act like this. And whenever we did get pulled over for some reason, it would be a repeat to be like, were you on your best behavior? Like, I have had that conversation so many times. I'm sure so many other people have had that conversation so many times. And now even the conservative media is acting like that's something that only Black people do. Just what?
Well, there's also, so, I mean, what you said there, you know, to pair that a little bit with what Karlyn said, about, you know, having people have their opinions confirmed and that's it, just be content with that, is right. And, you know, going back to the very, very beginning, you know, one of you guys mentioned the consequences of things. Mm-hmm. And I think Republicans have historically not had a lot of consequences in terms of whenever the left wins, you know, and I think I brought this up before, that just being controlled opposition and pointing at them and saying you're wrong or you're dumb has been enough for them, because their day-to-day life hasn't been affected nearly as much. And what they don't realize is that this is like, if this ideology wins, it will impact their day-to-day life. It'll impact their reality. It'll impact their kids at their jobs. And that's why I think the thing that wakes people up the most is whenever they run into it and they get pushed by it, and they're like, oh, this isn't just my neighbor who believes something crazy. They're trying to force me to do, you know, X, Y, or Z. And now I get it. But until they have that moment, there basically has been no consequences to them being controlled opposition. And I think also, you know, what you said, Karlyn, about how there are people who are just, all they have to do is oppose the left, and that's good enough for them. You know, one of the things that does, and back to the point about Caitlyn Jenner, is it alienates so many potential constituents, or, you know, allies, you know, for lack of a better word, people who you might find common ground with. I was thinking about this. I actually started to write a thing about it on my locals last night, and then I just got tired and passed out. But I finished watching Falcon and Winter Soldier last night. So Kevin,
I was gonna say, Kevin is disapproving.
Okay, so I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it. But I saw a lot of people on the right complaining that it was how woke it was, and is this in your face with leftist race ideology. And what they fail to understand, so in the show, there is this guy who was basically a Black guy that they experimented on after Steve Rogers with these variants of the super soldier formula, and it worked on him. He's a guy named Isaiah Bradley, and they sent him on missions. And then he went to go rescue some people that they didn't approve of, and then they experimented on him for like 30 years. And he had to basically fake his own death and get out of there. And he was really jaded against the country. He's really jaded. You know, he has this line, or the scene with Falcon, where Falcon's trying to understand, and Isaiah Bradley says, no self-respecting Black man would want to wear the stars and stripes, would want to represent that flag or that shield. That's Isaiah Bradley saying that. And there was a lot of people on the right who were mad about that kind of thing. And what got me upset is Isaiah Bradley was a real character in the comics. And that was their way of paying homage to the fact, guess what? Our government did experiment on Black people not that long ago. Okay. And whenever there's the line that, you know, Bradley has in there where he says, you know, we went and fought, and there's the Red Wings, and we went from World War II fighting and dying for this country to coming back and having crosses burned in our yards. That happened. That happened. So it's not some woke thing. They're not pushing some ideology down your throat. That really did happen. Okay. Obviously there wasn't a black super soldier, but that reality, there were black men who were experimented on, fought and died for this country. And those who didn't came back and had to wait, 18 years, 19 years before they had the same rights, before the Civil Rights Act was passed. That's true. When was Loving versus Texas? 1973? Not that long ago, and we had this Rubin Report thing the other night as a happy hour thing. And we were talking about movies and people were mentioning all these classic movies and I love classic rock. And so it's like, if the music from the 50s, 60s, and 70s and the movies from that time period and the books from that time period are relevant, we don't get to act like the other events and things there weren't relevant. And also just because the loudest voices, the people that are talking about those things are irresponsible and can't be trusted to talk about it. Ibram Kendi cannot be trusted to talk about those things. Ta-Nehisi Coates cannot be trusted to talk about those things. Okay. They hijack the conversation. They poison the well. It's bad. Okay. It's bad. But the right has to figure out how to address things that are just true without saying, dismissing it as that's just some woke thing, or that's just a leftist talking point. I don't know what the answer is. I don't. But just being that opposition and just pissing and moaning about it isn't an answer. And so they have to figure out how to thread the needle of, I don't want to validate anything Ta-Nehisi Coates says, even if I happen to agree with it, because the true believers will take that agreement and twist it and they'll be irresponsible with it. So the right needs to figure out how to say, I really cannot agree with you because you're a bad actor. I want to find the people who are good actors and talk to them. But you can't be trusted in this conversation without alienating people, whether it's over a Caitlyn Jenner thing or whether it's over a TV show like Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I thought at the end, Falcon's point was, I would feel the same way if I was him, but I'm not him. I didn't have those experiences. And so I'm still going to fight for this country. That's a good message. That's a good message, because if I was in that situation, if any of us were in that situation where if you were a black soldier in World War II and you watch your friends die, and you come back and people are burning crosses on your yard, yeah, you're going to be pissed. Okay, I get it. And so yeah, I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but the right has to figure out how to talk about those things without just being opposition and just opposing everything the left says and does. We have to validate it where it can be validated without, bringing the crazies into the conversation.
Yeah, well, one, Marvel just sucks. I think their movies are garbage. So that's why I didn't like it. But I actually did like the scene you were talking about. That was like the second last episode, and that was pretty good. I actually thought that was a really good message. I didn't appreciate the kind of anti-American pro-globalism aspect. That's what I didn't like, the woke part about it. But kind of going back to, Republicans sitting in their houses with all their guns, letting the world burn around them and think they're just going to be okay. I mean, this is kind of already inherent in the Republican Party, considering they're going to be much less open to new ideas. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that people like Jonathan Haidt have talked about as why people are predisposed to certain political positions. And it makes sense for those types of people to be like, all right, I'm just going to stay away from it. And if the world burns, that's your world. I'm going to stay here on my plot of land and it'll be fine. But one of the things that really, continues to open my mind about this is because I do consider myself one of those people. I am not particularly open to new things. I don't, it took me like 25 years to try sushi for the first time. So it's not like I'm all gung ho about trying all this new stuff, but like my conversation with Deb Villman about education, the stuff is coming into all forms of school. I mean, public school, we're talking about private school. I mean, she's basically talking the only for sure option to get a proper education for your kids is homeschooling. Like that is going into your house, and your guns are not going to stop that. So you have to be proactive. And that was my message as a parent with no education background, with no, she kind of takes it from more of a teaching perspective, but I have to do it as a parent because my kids are young and going through this stuff right now. And the only solution that I have is to be proactive. You cannot just sit there and wait for it to happen to you or happen to your kids, because it's going to come whether you want it to or not. And part of this is being able to look at someone like Caitlyn Jenner. I'm probably the most conservative person on this panel in terms of my demeanor and how I would vote if I lived in California right now. No doubt I'd be voting for Caitlyn Jenner, because like I said, it's trending in the right direction. It's part of that political reality. And you can't just sit back and and think this stuff is not going to make it into your home, because it already is, and it's almost too late. And I agree with Karlyn on this, that if you don't change it in the next couple of years, things are going to go too far, dam's going to break, and there's no way to stop it.
Yeah. And the nice thing about Caitlyn Jenner is that Caitlyn's going to actually do things and isn't just going to be focused on opposition to this or that, specifically because she falls into one of those categories that would normally be just seen as, oh, if you're trans, you're automatically in the leftist pile, in the right-wing mindset. So by being a part of that, it gives her the advantage of not really being susceptible to it, at least not as much.
Yeah.
I would suspect.
And in my perspective on the Caitlyn Jenner thing is this serves a higher purpose, frankly, than any of the policies that she would implement, which I do, again, generally think that they would be conservative policies because she's been a conservative her entire life. But this is a bigger picture thing of waking up Americans who have been completely blinded to this issue, and all of a sudden they see the Republican Party supporting the trans candidate. This is a bigger picture issue than what are her specific policies around any of these minute issues that are probably not going to get changed in California anyway, because it's flipping California. Like this serves, the larger goal of red pilling people who might be on the fence, creating a lot of cognitive dissonance, them not knowing how to react to Republicans supporting a trans woman versus Democrats supporting a white man. That's what her purpose is, so far as I'm concerned. I frankly don't even care where she sits on a lot of these issues, because again, it's California. It doesn't really matter anyway. But I think I want to move on to a different question though. So, I mean, I guess what do we do in this situation? Because my perspective at the moment is that I don't think that Republicans are going to wake up unless they are forced to. And I don't think that it is enough to say primary the candidates you don't like, because I don't think that most of those primaries are going to be successful. I think a lot of Republicans think that there's going to be this rhino purge in 2022. I don't see that happening. I think some good candidates are going to be elected, but I don't think there's going to be the grand rhino purge. I think Liz Cheney's probably going to make it back in again because the party's going to support her. So is the only option that we have to try to get the Republican Party to wake up, is it just to simply not vote for those candidates?
So going scorched earth, you mean, basically?
Absolutely. Because here's the thing. If we vote for the candidates that they're going to try to get elected, they're going to win. They're going to win. And then they will have learned nothing. They will have learned absolutely nothing in the exercise. And they'll say, oh, we told you that all those 10 million extra voters that voted for Donald Trump in 2020, we told you they were going to stick around no matter how crappy the candidates were that we put in front of them. So is the only option essentially this is like mutually assured destruction, isn't it? It's kind of like you have the conservatives and you have the politically homeless. So I'm going to put James and Kevin in the conservative category. I'm going to put Truman and I in the politically homeless category. And it's like, if we don't find a way to find candidates that we can all agree to, then we all lose. We all lose. That's what it is. And if that's what it takes to get the Republicans to wake up and to start fighting back, then fine.
Yeah, I would say that there definitely is that need here. And I think one of the things we need to do is we need to start getting our primary candidates set up today. Like if you know any potential candidates, like Billy Prempeh, I think he ran for senator or something in New Jersey. I'm pretty sure I remember he was on Tim Pool's show during the week of the RNC. So back before the election, and he did lose. Like he was competing in a Democrat-run district against a guy who's been there forever. But we need to start finding guys like that. Finding is her name Kim? I can't say her last name. Klacik. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Klacik. So we need to start finding candidates like them and getting them to be as big as possible.
Yeah, but
before all this.
But I want to move beyond the primary, because like we look at someone like Kim Klacik. Kim Klacik was always like she was a great candidate in a very blue district. That was always going to be an uphill battle.
She got single digit votes, I think. I'm pretty sure.
So like what I'm interested in is, so let's just assume the good candidates don't win in the primary. We get to the general. There is a Rhino candidate and a Democrat. I think that the only option is to not vote or to vote third party. I think that is the only option that teaches the Republican Party that you cannot serve up woefully inadequate candidates and expect us to support them.
That are right in the primary person who lost, the good candidate. But I think I think it's kind of defeatist to just automatically assume the Rhinos are going to win in all these primaries. I think it's highly likely, but I think there are some things that we can do before then to try to make sure that doesn't happen as much. And one of the big things is, so Tim Pool's lately been talking about creating culture in a lot of ways. But one of the things that, if some people have seen some of my oldest content, you'll know that I like to kind of create my own phrases and definitions for things. Like I think Kevin, you always talk about how you're conservative and here's what you say, what a conservative is to you. But if 90% of the people out there think a conservative is just someone who's holding the status quo, it's not going to do you very good to say, oh, that's not what a conservative really is, because people just believe that that's what a conservative really is. That's why I come up with phrases like progressive traditionalist, or just any kind of like word for being more of a traditionalist. And then people are just gonna be like, oh, what is that? Once you start giving people a way to say, what is that? Or once you make people want to learn and you make people curious and you take away the presuppositions of what people think something is, you're able to really start to lead people in a direction. And the problem with the Republicans is they always adopt the language of the left. Whenever something comes up, they always adopt that language and they don't create their own language. So I think one of the most important things we can do in the short term, in the near term, and into the long term is that we need to create a right that is forming its own language, that is bringing minds to think in a more traditional, valued way.
So I think sorry if I just made interject
go
fast.
Go ahead.
Yep. So if you got to think of it in terms of this, a Republican is a party, conservative is a political ideology. I think people will be more interested if they see liberals, independents, or libertarians, conservatives, all of these groups voting Republican. I think that'll make people a little bit more interested than just giving them a different label, I think. But what I think we need to do is part of what I've done in the last year, and I've always talked about this group, is I stayed in this Facebook group called, well, I'm not going to name them, but I always called them the Lincoln Project Conservatives, because they're the Never Trump Conservatives. And I spent so much time trying to convince them that they're wrong, trying to convince them even that not only that they're wrong or they should be voting for Trump, but just to recognize that Trump actually gave them some good ideas that they should follow through with. And actually they would understand they'd start to win. And they completely rejected it up to the point where I eventually got kicked out of the group, but I was going to quit it anyways. And I know Truman kept telling me to quit it and that it was not worth my effort, but that's the point here. My efforts were put toward something that didn't make a difference. So I think a lot of what Republicans are trying to do is to win back that Never Trump vote. That effort is not going to go anywhere. I don't think Liz Cheney is ever going to turn around to what the Republican Party is becoming now, which is less of the rhinos and more of, I guess you could say Trump style, but I would say more traditionally conservative.
MAGA populist.
Yeah,
they're it's populism.
Yeah. Well, that term, I don't love that term, and I never explained that why I don't like that. But I get what you mean. But the point is, we put our efforts toward trying to pull in these groups that have traditionally voted this way, rather than looking at what I would call like more like reform liberals, like Karlyn and Truman. I think if the Republicans put their efforts to say, hey, look at all of these new people who are here and have really good ideas, actually voting for, stuff that's not crazy left or even stuff that is Republican, if they'd actually focus on those voters, they would start to win. So I think to kind of do the larger version of me quitting a Facebook group because my efforts just were put in the wrong place. I'm starting to agree now more with Karlyn that we may have to start voting for people who are not running under the flag as Republican, to send a message to say we can't keep doing this. We keep spinning our wheels. Like we say, okay, vote as red as you can for every election cycle, but all you do is you maintain this one person who's basically of the left, and you just keep voting him as red rather than showing like this needs to end. Like we cannot keep this cycle going, or we just keep running our tires in the mud and not going anywhere.
Yeah. And Kevin, I'm actually really glad that you said that, because this whole thing for me is about am I putting my energy towards something that is a good use of my energy? Is trying to convince the Republican Party to not run rhino candidates a good use of my energy? And James, I want to pick up on something you said too, in terms of changing language and controlling language. I think that right now is actually a golden opportunity for a legitimate third party to swoop in. Now, the problem is that the libertarians mostly suck, right? Except
they're high all the time. Come on.
Well, but except for the Mises Caucus. The Mises Caucus is actually they're getting really close to taking over the Libertarian Party. They're so I was just at a Mises Caucus meetup last night. Their membership their meetup started 4 months ago in New Hampshire. It started with 3 guys. There were over 40 people there last night. So they're growing exponentially. Their Facebook views and their Twitter views are up 11,000%. PorcFest, which is the big libertarian festival in New Hampshire, is about to sell out. They have over double the attendance that they have ever had before, ever. And they said that this all started after January 6th. And so where I'm at right now is I agree more with the Mises Caucus people than I don't. I agree with a lot of their values align with things that I would have said I agree with anyway, personal property and, getting out of identity politics and things like that. Now, of course, there's this, they're not going to win anything. They're not going to win a national office anytime soon. But is this a moment where we can actually give an opportunity for a third party to legitimately rise, while at the same time teaching the Republican Party a much deserved lesson?
So I have a few thoughts on kind of everything you just said, and the kind of we went around the horn there a little bit. But my first thought is, I understand what you're saying, Karlyn, about not voting or sending a message letting the Republicans lose. I will say that on a base level, you're more likely to get something done when you're in power than if you're not in power. And I think that they could take a lesson from the left on this, honestly. I mean, the progressives weren't happy with Biden, right? But they still showed up. And he was the establishment thing. He was everything that they were against. But they're in power now. And so they're talking about adding Supreme Court seats and adding DC as a state. And he's parroting a lot of their language. I don't know how much he's going to do, but my point is you're more likely to do something if you have the ability to do it than if you don't, than if your opposition has an ability to do it. So I will say that I do think there is something to that. Let me put it this way. If there was no real consequences, so let's kind of pair these two thoughts with what you said about how we don't have a lot of time left, which I agree with. If we don't have a lot of time left, then that means that we don't have a lot of time to fuck around trying to send messages right now. I think there's ways to communicate what we would want to communicate in terms of, with them losing, without ceding more power to the people that are actively destroying the country. I don't know what those things are, but my point is that if you're to say if we have an asymmetry of time in our relationship with time, and if we know that this is dangerous, how are we more likely to get something done? If we don't have power, if we do have power, if we have a mixture of AOCs and establishment Democrats in power, or, just not in power at all. And I think the left understands that. One of the things the left does is they come together when it matters. They come together when it matters and they say, we'll sort this shit out later. And there's savage infighting on the left. And that's why, a Marxist publication or a socialist publication like Jacobin can, write a whole article this a couple of years ago about when AOC said, me and Joe Biden don't really belong in the same party. If we were in another country, we would not be in the same party. And that's true. And that's why, one of the things that I've been saying was Nancy Pelosi has more in common with Donald Trump than she does with AOC. And Bernie Sanders has more in common, with, someone way on the far left than he does with Nancy Pelosi. And so, but the point is that they know how to circle the wagons when it matters. Yeah. And the right doesn't do that.
But Truman, I have to push back on this, though, because what you're describing is going to lead to candidates to being elected who are going to do nothing about any of these problems. They're not going to do anything. Chris Sununu supports critical race theory. So he's not going to do anything about this problem.
So I understand what you're saying. I guess so. My point is that you're more likely to get something done if you have power than if you don't. That's all I'm saying. And so maybe part of that answer is making sure that if, let's say, so Chris Sununu, whatever, death by snoo snoo, is what that makes me think of as a Futurama reference, but
love it.
Is that maybe you make sure that part of the way someone like that gets elected, if they are going to get elected, is that the people who are involved in that are saying, look, right now, just know I am not for a lot of these things, but I'm going to help you get elected so that you are not beholden. I mean, that's what happens. These candidates become beholden to constituents, to different constituencies. And that's how they make a lot of their decisions. That's how it is, because of the constituents they're beholden to. Again, I'm just saying, how are you more likely to get something done?
Well, but Truman, again, I have to push back because Chris Sununu is currently the governor of my state and feels absolutely no obligation to his constituents. Liz Cheney, like 90% of her state, like actually probably more than that, loves Donald Trump, and she felt no obligation to those constituents. They don't feel the obligation to do anything because there are no consequences for them ignoring their constituents. They're literally wrong because they know that they're still going to run. The party's still going to support them. The Republicans are going to say, oh, well, they're better than the Democrats, so we're going to vote for them anyway. Then they're going to get into office and they're absolutely going to ignore their constituents.
You're not wrong.
Republicans do every damn time.
So you're not wrong. I agree with all of those things. Okay, I agree with all of those things. I'm just saying that you can't completely ignore this concept of lesser of two evils, and you can't completely, dismiss the fact that the left knows how to circle the wagons and incrementally get things done in a way that the right doesn't. Because again, AOC doesn't like Nancy Pelosi, but you better believe they're locking arms when it matters. That's all I'm saying. And the other part is so let's go back to the primarying thing, the idea of primarying these people. And, you say, well, the rhino candidates will still get elected or the good candidates won't get elected. Well, why? There's a layer beneath that, which goes back to what I said earlier about people being informed about this shit. So it's not just making sure there's a good candidate there, but making sure that the people who are supporting the candidate that would be primarying out the, impotent rhino, whatever thing, the Liz Cheney types or the Chris Snoo, types or whatever, that they are being very vocal about why that person has to go. And that goes back to, I think, there's this idea of that I've said for a long time is the right doesn't know how to make converts. They don't know how to convert people to their ideology. They only know how to point and say that's wrong. And so there needs to be the people who would be, what we could call it the new right. We could call it, the populist thing, which again, I think, Karlyn, you're not wrong to say that there is a lot of overlap between populism on the left, populism on the right. I'm not so sure about the third party thing, but there is a big coalition potential between the disaffected left and disaffected right. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think the right now is just a baseball player fielding ground balls of people of different ideologies coming right at them. They're just fielding them, but then they don't know
what to do with it.
Exactly. They don't know what base to throw it to. They don't know.
Exactly. And so, but they don't know how to make converts. And I think there's also, what you said, one of you guys said something about how they're just content to sit and vote red. And I think the people who understand that that's not enough have to figure out how to make converts from their own team. So an example would be, an evangelical Christian is trying to convert and proselytize to a Mormon just as much as they are to an atheist. So there might be some things that the Mormons would say that they agree with them on, but an evangelical says, no, we have different beliefs. We might say some of the same things, but what I'm saying is true, and what you're saying is not going to work. I have the right belief. And so they're not just reaching out to atheists. It's other people who might have a similar belief, but that they don't think is quite there yet. And so I think there's people on the right who have to figure out it's not, how do you reach out to those on the left? That might be the atheist type, right? Who has nothing in common, but also to those on the right who are sanguine, who are very naive. I think naivete is a huge part of this. On those on the right who are just, vote red and then that's it. That's all I have to do. I can post Joe Biden memes on Facebook and I'm good. So there has to be a way to reach out to both. But okay, so if we're going to do the primary thing or talk about it, like I understand what you're saying, but let's not make it a foregone conclusion and figure out, okay, how do we inform people who would be voting for those rhinos, why those rhinos are not in their best interest? And, there's a reality where we have to figure out how to take the Christian conservative and also the people who would say, yes, let's vote for Caitlyn Jenner. I happen to fall in both of those groups, right? But there are people on the kind of the new right who would say, let's not listen to the Christian conservative types because we're moving past that. And there's the Christian conservative types say, we don't want the new, they're just bringing in all their liberalism. Karlyn, that's some of those lunatics you've debated and talked to. But the reality is the left has mechanisms ready and waiting to catch those people the minute they feel alienated. Progressive Christianity will take in all of those Christians who feel alienated and pervert, their belief system. And the Bernie Sanders types will take in all of the people who would maybe come from the left who say, okay, fine, screw it. This is simple. Caitlyn Jenner's a gimme, but you don't want to do it. Fine, screw it. I'm just going to stay home or I'll vote this way. So they have to figure out how to do that. And so people like us, I think the onus, my point is, I think the onus is on us is to figure out we have a conversion problem. And that's it. So the rhino might lose. Why would they lose? They don't get enough votes. Why don't they get enough votes? Because the voters don't realize why they should be voting for that person. And that is a numbers game, which is what we've talked about before. That's a numbers game. And we get the numbers by getting the information out there.
Hang on, but here's the thing. Like, what if the actual solution to the woke problem is that the Libertarian Party needs to step up? And is that the politically homeless can see that at least the Mises caucus within the Libertarian Party is like a viable option, or can become a viable option and can become more of a player? Because I think that if people saw it as a more viable option, that would be something that more people would be interested in. What if the answer to this problem is actually the rise of a movement that says, get the government the fuck out of our business? And I think that this is a moment where that can happen. And I think that I would rather put my eggs, I think, in that basket than in hoping and praying that the Republican Party is going to come around, because I just don't think they're going to. Because I've talked to so many people in the last couple of weeks that have told me flat out, Truman, that, yes, I know so-and-so is a better candidate, but the Rhino has the name recognition, and so I'm going to vote for them anyway. They know this, and they're doing it consciously anyway. So that's not a team I can support anymore. That's a team that doesn't have principles. It's a team that doesn't have a vision. It's a team that doesn't want to lead, but the Mises Caucus does, and they do have a vision, and they do have principles, and they're starting to gain a lot of ground. And if they could get to the point of viability by the 2024 election, and people can see that, there could be a migration in that direction. And I think that actually might be one of the best solutions to the woke problem that exists on our table of options.
Yeah, I think
in all fairness, there's precedent for that. Well, let me just say some really fast response. In all fairness, there is precedent to that. I mean, that's where the Republican Party came from. Basically, it arose as a single issue party. We've had parties come and go in the past, Bull Moose, Whig, whatever. So that does happen. I'm not saying it can't happen. But it would require a tremendous amount of disaffected people on both sides who understand the nature of their disaffection. Who understand that their anger, who know how to, I guess, properly direct their anger. And so that requires good information, it requires self-awareness. And I'm not sure, I have some doubts about that with the current media complex, with what is shaping the opinions and the beliefs and the outrage of people on both sides. But there is a precedent for that. And the other thing I would say is that, yeah, maybe if they have some really successful local elections and they do really well in a few places in 2022, yeah, I honestly could see that happening. Outside of that, I don't know how many elections that we have to lose. I just don't know how many, we can afford to lose this, we can afford to lose this, we can afford to lose this, and then maybe we'll have a good showing here. I have a friend who It's actually a Democrat that I voted for in this last election at a local level. And she said, Democrats don't usually win in this position in this county. She said, but I'm going to do it 3 times. And if I don't win the 3rd time, then at least I tried. She said, because normally Democrats just run once and they lose and they don't. And this last time around, she lost again, but she got way more votes than she did the first time. My point is that she's like, yeah, I can afford to lose elections. I can afford to do that. I'm not sure on a national level, we can afford to lose, that we have like 4, 6, 8, 10 years to spare, trying to get some momentum going. So if the momentum is building, if that does happen on the local level, I actually would probably be right there with you, to be honest. And so if I see that, then yes. But I would say there has to be a plan B if that doesn't happen. There has to be a plan B if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think
that's all my point is.
I think 2022 is going to be very insightful in that case, because if we do see massive losses by Republicans with no willingness to change, then obviously we know we ran out of time and we'll have to course correct from there. But when it comes to like a third party like that, I think what would probably most likely happen is the third party, if it gets enough momentum, it would just be absorbed by whichever party's closest to it ideologically at the time is probably what would happen. But I think there's a big messaging problem. And this is the reason why Republicans are so bad at converting, because of the message they send out. Democrats, I will give you stuff. That is their message. That is their promise. It is much more appealing than the Republican message, which has traditionally been, I'll stop giving everyone stuff. Right. That is their message. And it's not the right message, even though there's a lot of truth to it. Their message should be, I will fight for you. That is what they need to start doing. And I think that's what a responsible third party would start to do, because too often has it been the Republican strategy of being like, I'm going to let the free market take care of this. If they want to do CRT, that's their own problem. But now the Republicans need to course correct and say, no, we need to fight against bad ideas. We need to actively fight against the stuff, rather than just saying we'll step aside and let people make their own decisions or buy into these awful ideas that are going to end up hurting everyone else, going to have that externality to it.
Yeah, well, the Republicans don't even believe in the free market anyways, but like they just give it lip service. But I want to say one of the big issues seems to be that on the left, you could say that for the Dems, AOC is almost like a leftist, like controlled opposition for them in a way. Because of how she'll always side with it. Like, think about how she flips her tune on the kids in cages thing as soon as Biden takes over. Like, she's a weapon for them. And that's the thing. The Democrats do this very smartly. They appeal to their most extremes because they weaponize them so that they can utilize them. What the Republicans do is whenever they get any kind of power or any kind of position, they can have a super majority. And rather than pushing towards their base, pushing towards their most fervent, like, I want to get this shit done people, they will compromise with ghosts. They will say, our base wants us to go against this. So that thing exists. So we must compromise with that thing. It makes no sense. Like with you, Karlyn, in New Hampshire with the CRT stuff. Republicans have everything. So what's their idea? And their people want them to go against it. So what's their idea? We must compromise with the CRT stuff. It's this absurd obsession with decorum to the point where they will shoot themselves in the foot because someone else wanted to cut off their heads. That the person doesn't need to have a sword, but they'll see that, oh, there's a person over there, and I think that person wants to cut off my head. So I'm just going to shoot myself in the foot and hope that they're appeased.
Well, but the thing of it is, James, is that there's no consequence for them doing it. This is
exactly
why they do it, because there is absolutely zero consequence to them doing it. There's more, they get more consequence from the left than they do from their own voters. And I guess like, I just don't know what the point is if we're going to continue to exist in this reality where Republicans are going to elect stupid candidates that aren't going to stand up for them. They're going to be in office. They're going to compromise with the Democrats, which basically, for all intents and purposes, for how I'm concerned, makes them basically a Democrat. They aren't going to advance conservative principles. They aren't going to fight back against the woke stuff. So then why should I vote for them if I can expect them to do, not only expect them to do literally nothing to support the issues that I care about, but also are actually going to actively stab me in the back after I give them my vote? Why, why should I even bother?
Well, there is back to the information thing, there are just moments, that X moment is very telling, how a person says it's very telling. And I think one of those moments was Chris Wallace calling critical race stuff racial sensitivity training in that debate with Biden and Trump. And that was a moment that I think is very, very emblematic of how ignorant, and like I said earlier, how naive a lot of people are on the right to these issues. Now, someone who like whatever Clint Snoo or whatever in Rhode Island, who's maybe been briefed on this stuff, probably doesn't have an excuse. I don't know what possible reasoning he would have for not opposing this stuff. And so screw that guy. But I think the average everyday conservative doesn't understand this stuff. And so they don't, and therefore they're going to be appeased with the abortion and guns type thing. And James, to your point about, worried about decorum and stuff, you're absolutely right. There's another section of the Republican Party that, here's the reality. When you're right about things, when I say right, I mean correct about things, you get a certain air of superiority about you. You get a certain I think that whenever you mentioned how the right is just as emotional earlier, I think it's absolutely right. I think the right has a lot of pride in the fact that they know the right answers to certain things. In terms of economics, they know no, socialism is dumb. What's that old saying? People on the left think that, people on the right are evil. People on the right think people on the left are stupid. And if you think they're stupid, then that means you're just because the left thinks they're morally superior to the right and they act accordingly. But the right understands that in a lot of ways they're intellectually superior to at least to the ideas on the left, and they act accordingly too. And whenever you do that, you're going to have that sense of decorum. And so I know Republicans, again, who might be veterans, have always voted Republican and who hated Donald Trump because of stuff he said about, I'm drawing a blank on his name, John McCain and other things, and how he violated all their decorum and their sense of we are the intellectually superior thing. And it's like, you can dislike those things. Again, the idea, it's not any different if you're on the left waiting for some utopia perfect thing than if you're on the right waiting for some utopian candidate who perfectly embodies all of your ideals and everything you want them to be. Those are both fiction. And the fact that there is such a big group on the right, how about this? Here's an example. Have we heard of Never Bidens on the left? I haven't. I know there's people that didn't like him, but it was blue no matter who. But there are people on the right who were never Trump because he violated
Corn
their
Pop
sense
was never Biden, if I remember correctly.
I think Corn Pop was opposed.
Well, no, there were
he's a bad dude.
No, there were progressives who were never Biden. Nico House was never Biden. Yeah.
Yes, but I'm saying that's not a thing that we have name recognition with the same way we have name recognition with never Trump. That you're right. Yes, there are people like shoe on head type lefties who don't like the establishment and weren't for Biden. My point is that they weren't so big that they had a name for them that is recognizable years and years later, the same way that we have with Never Trumpers that still persisted from 2016 to 2020. Like there are people who remained Never Trumpers the whole time because of some fantasy of decorum and we are the right thing. And so, but those are the people that are shaping the opinions a lot of times for the voters. And if those assholes are the ones shaping the opinions for the voters, then those are the assholes who are creating voters that are just happy with you say the right things about guns and abortion and you dress nice and you can poke fun, maybe say Michael Knowles type things and poke fun at how stupid those on the left are. And you're placated with that. And that's not enough. That's not enough.
Yeah, there's certainly a problem here with that low information diet is not always people who do not attempt to be informed. There are people who are going to those sources like you talked before, James, CNN and Fox News, where there is an asymmetry of information getting out there. I mean, Truman and I talked a long time ago about corrupt or rigid hierarchies, and the reason they get that way is when they don't allow feedback into the system. There's not a lot of outlets for people like us who understand what's happening and be able to get our ideas out there, because no one like CNN or Fox News even will really even cover something like that. So there is this corruption via the media that also, when it comes to alternative candidates to the right, what do they label every alternative candidate to the right? They label them some sort of QAnon supporter or something like that. I watched the QAnon show on HBO that covered the conspiracy theory, and the way they covered it was insane. They basically just labeled it, Donald Trump is like at the head of it, like accusing him that he's Q. I don't even know anything much about QAnon in and of itself, but they're shining this conspiracy theory of the right, yet there's a conspiracy theory of the left, which to me is systemic racism. That is a conspiracy theory at the level of QAnon. You have to be a conspiracy theorist to believe that there is some racism out there in the ethos controlling everything that people do. I think is absolutely insane, but that's not covered because of this crazy asymmetry in the media. So it's very difficult for people like us or anyone with an alternative opinion to actually get something out there. And I think that's why you get all these rhino candidates, because that is what they want you to believe, that is the only alternative option. And those people just want to cut taxes for the rich. And that's how they label it. And that's how they keep people on a low information diet, even though there's a lot of people out there who are on that diet who want more. They want more nutrition, and they just don't know what outlets to get it from.
But I have to push back on that, though, because right now the trust in the media is at an all-time low. So CNN can produce whatever documentaries it wants, MSNBC can, HBO can, whatever. Like, trust in them is at an all-time low. So there's an opportunity there for that to come out. We also, but like, my biggest pushback on this is that there are high information Republicans that are not willing to fight back. And if the high information, listen, I don't care what the left is doing. I think that anytime we bring what the left is doing and how much power the left has into the conversation, we're frankly giving them more power because we're playing the game based on the rules that they have set. I think that this is not a game that we are going to win if we are always thinking about opposing or like being in opposition to what the left is doing. I don't think that's possible. We have to start creating our own rules for this. And if I'm seeing over and over again Republican voters or conservative voters that are high information voters that know exactly what's going on, that know exactly what critical race theory is, and they're saying to me, I'm okay with electing rhinos because it's better than the Democrats, even if those rhinos support critical race theory, then what is the consequence of continuing to support this? Because this is the problem. It's like, I think that the path of least resistance is for us to say, well, yeah, you're right, they are better than the Democrats. And, to Truman's point, at least it gives us something. Maybe we take back the House, something like that, and that would be good. But there is a long-term consequence to supporting these people who hate their own voters. And do we continue to go down that road and pursue that option when there is, what potentially could be a viable option with the Mises Caucus and the Libertarian Party, that if more people went there, it would instantly become viable. Like 10 million more people voted for Donald Trump in 2020 than in 2016. And I have to believe that a good portion of those people are politically homeless people. What if instead of continuing to try to latch their wagon onto the Republican Party, they said, screw you, you're not serving our needs either, we're going over here?
And people forget that the Republican establishment tried to do to Trump what the Democratic establishment did successfully do to Bernie. Yeah. The 2016 was a battle of outsiders and the establishment on both sides. And the right underestimated Trump, and he won that battle. And the left was able to successfully, maybe because they're more corrupt, I don't know, or at least they applied their corruption more in that particular case, were able to successfully defeat Bernie Sanders. When you look at what they did to Bernie, it's crazy. And the Republican Party was very much in panic mode going into the, I guess, is it Ohio or whatever, when they decide, the RNC, whenever they decide who the candidate's going to be, they're like, is there going to be a contested thing here? How are we going to do it? They were in panic mode, and Trump just had too much momentum. And so I think you're right. And then there's, let's think about things like, so you're mentioning this Mises thing. I thought that Brett Weinstein's Unity 2020 thing was a naive pipe dream, but I appreciate the fact that he understood something needed to be done. And there were people who supported it. So, as we're talking about this, I don't think you're wrong to understand that there is a growing group of people on both sides who are becoming more and more disillusioned with this. To your question about, we're talking about a lot at the most, I guess, non-local level, right? We're talking about Senate races, House of Representatives, governors, presidential stuff. But at the same time, the way that movement of politically homeless people has been growing is because there's people who are there who are able to reach out to them on both sides and bring them in and help grow that coalition. So I think that, to kind of be a little bit optimistic about it, someone like Dave Rubin would be a good example of someone who I think Dave Rubin he gets so much shit from people who call him a grifter and all these other things. I think it's ridiculous. But he has done more, I think, to legitimately build institutions and build bridges with people on the left and on the right to kind of have a gathering place. I think Locals represents that in a lot of ways. But he also does other things with other people for this growing coalition of homeless people. That's really more of a populist type thing. But whenever I say that, I just mean people on the left and the right who understand that the establishment politicians on their respective sides don't have their best interest in mind. Karlyn, to your point, that they don't care about their voters, they might hate them, but if you're not doing anything to help them, it's all the same outcome, right? And so we have to, there is utility to thinking about up here on the election thing, but elections are numbers games, and numbers, it's voters. And so I think as long as we have receptacles of people like us who will say, the establishment right is not the answer. That is not the answer. Mitch McConnell's not the answer. Anyone like, my God, Liz Cheney, not the answer. Those types of people, Kevin Snoo, not the answer. Like whatever, your governor, like not the answer. And so, maybe by 2022, that we'll have something there. I don't know. I would love to see some local elections that has people who are like, I think the good, heuristic is Proud Boys and BLM people saying, we don't agree on some things, but we agree that the establishment isn't serving us. And so we're going to come together on these things. And I think CRT, going back to my point I made earlier about the Republican Party, was basically a single issue party in terms of opposing the spread of slavery being legalized in the United States. There's probably something there to the idea of having a single issue party or coalition that's like, we are going to stop critical race theory. We're going to stop the spread of this cancerous ideology. We're going to make sure people know how to oppose it, how to talk about it. This is not racial sensitivity training. This is not learning to be a nice person. This is not acknowledging that racism exists. That's not what this is. And so maybe there is something there. The problem is that we're not going to get very many people from the left, at least the disaffected left, the progressives, and the populist left is not going to be on board with that. That's going to be more the center left people like the Dave Rubin types. Douglas Murray's, I guess he's more of a conservative and also not an American, but you see what I'm saying? But maybe there's something there with the single issue thing. I don't know. But we have to have these receptacles to catch the disaffected people on both sides in order to even be contemplating how we would win elections, because those are numbers games.
So I've got a bit of a different opinion on this, because I'm honestly at the point where I think we kind of need to go scorched earth on this. I think you guys have brought up the timetable. Truman, you've brought up how we might not have really these 10 years to do this because the damage will be done too quickly. And I think the thing is, as long as we have that mindset, we are going to be screwed. There is a need for us to say, even if we don't have 10 years, we need to act like we have 10 years, because quite frankly, keeping in the Republicans as they are just slowly letting the frog boil. The Democrats and especially the farther leftists want to set everything on fire. And I think as long as we maintain the current GOP hold, the establishment GOP hold, we're going to always be that boiling frog. And there is an amount of issue where, as the saying goes, you need to light a fire under his ass. I know I don't have the proper delivery for that, but
well, that's the point Michael Malice makes in his book, is that the people on the new right who or that maybe in the anarchy type thing that he's in, he writes a lot about the libertarian movement, but he says that you have to let progressivism consume itself. You have to let it self-immolate, and that it will, and that the best thing you can do is get out of the way and let the fire burn. And he says there are people there who say, actually, you need to actively encourage it. Like,
yeah,
let it accelerate. My only issue, I'm actually not necessarily opposed to that in some ways. You know, like an example practically would be like in Portland. I think people who are sane in Portland need to leave and let Portland hit rock bottom, and let the fire burn. There,
that's a controlled fire, is what I would say.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. That's my point. That's a control burn. Yeah. We do not have the luxury of letting that happen on a national level. Yeah. And so, like, the control burns, I'm good with it, to be honest. And I think as long as, I've really changed my mind on this idea of building new institutions. I used to think that was a bad idea, that we had to try and salvage the old ones. But I've completely come around on that in the last several months. I think we do need to build new institutions, so that, because if we believe, or at least I do believe, that a lot of these institutions can't be saved, we will not be able to infiltrate them and take them back, then it's got to burn itself out. And the only way to win is by building competing institutions that are competent and good at what they're doing. So while that building over there is burning, and there's someone standing in the street saying, which one do I want to go into? They have a fucking door to go in. And so their only option is the Bernie Sanders burning building, because that's what that's what the right has done so far, is that they're like, well, we're going to be silent on a lot of these things. We're not going to build anything new. We're going to try to compromise with Ghost. I think that's a great example, James. And so they've let the left, be the only game in town for a lot of this stuff. And so people only have the option of walking into that burning building. And so we have to build up some of these new institutions. But I don't know how to allow the control burns without also enabling that which would be, a scorched earth, William Tecumseh Sherman type thing, ideologically, but for our entire country. I don't know how to do that.
To set the parameters for that control burn is extremely difficult. I mean, Portland's an easy idea because it's got the boundaries and it's got that own ideological hole there. But to just say stand back and watch it burn, yeah, as entertaining as that can be sometimes, just like I talked about with Deb, it coming into your schools, that burn's already at your front doorstep, and there's got to be ways to put it out in some small capacity to at least protect yourself, or this burn's just going to keep spreading, and that's the difficult part to answer.
Well, the closest I can come up to is, just real fast on that, is leave the cities.
And that's what we plan on doing, yeah.
That's the closest I can come up with, but I don't think that's enough. But that's the best worst answer I can think of. Sorry, Karlyn.
No, it's okay. So I mean, I think like where I'm at is the burn is going to happen anyway. Sometimes things need to get worse before they get better. The burn is going to happen anyway. There's no stopping it. And I think that the only thing that I can think of that would even give people a momentary pause about where we're at is, frankly, if the Republicans do not get the red wave that they're looking for in 2022. Because frankly, like, a red wave in 2022 is not going to make the difference. Joe Biden still controls the federal, it's not going to make the difference. But I think what might make a difference is if that red wave completely and totally fails because they run feckless, cowardly candidates. And to see that, no, we are like, you don't get to transfer what Donald Trump did in 2020. You don't get that automatically. And I think that combined with, possibly something like the libertarians were doing, if the Mises Caucus continues on the course they're there, I think that would be a big wake up call to say, oh shit, we're going to lose everything perpetually forever, because they're not, those voters, the Trump voters that came around, they're not going to stick around. They're going to leave us high and dry. So then it's a matter of what can we do to get to your point, Truman, like capture these voters, like get them back. They're not going to be thinking in those terms unless they see that we are going to allow them to lose. And I think that losing in 2022 is a small price to pay for the larger war, especially when it comes to whoever they're going to nominate for president for 2024. They're getting any ideas of like Nikki Haley is the best possible nominee. I think that needs to be put to a stop.
Well, and you're not wrong there. I think there is something, to be said. Again, the way that people are waking up is by being pushed out by the left. The people are red-pilled by encountering this stuff. And the way that more and more people encounter it is by it having more and more power. And basically every person who's red-pilled, another way to frame that is their collateral damage, is that they have been harmed. I use that loosely, but they've had a negative experience with this stuff. And so, but the way more and more people have negative experiences with this stuff is by it having more power and trying to exert its will. And so, but my point to that is, okay, I don't disagree with you at all, Karlyn. I mean, it's like, maybe we have to pour gasoline on the fire in some ways to accelerate how many people have a negative experience with this. I don't know how much track we have. There's that saying, eventually you're going to run out of track. I don't know. I don't know how much we can afford to lose, how much more damage we can afford to sustain before, basically, okay, we hit the critical mass of how many people are required to push back. And now we're going to retake the ash heap, and maybe that's where the alternative institutions comes in, is that it's not just the ashes are what the left burnt down, and that there is these other things standing that the people who are sane built, and then they can compete amongst themselves. So a thing, that was maybe more run by a Ben Shapiro type can compete with something that's run by more a Dave Rubin type. I'm not saying they're in the same game, but you get my point.
Yeah.
And so then the competing values are still at least among the sane, and not that the crazies are in the ashes. But I don't know. But I think you might be right about the 2022 thing. That if they try to reject the MAGA populist, for lack of a better term, and they get their ass beat, then maybe they'll wake up to that. I don't know, but I think there's probably something to that.
Yeah, it's ineffective to do what the Rhino Republicans are trying to do, which is to put out this burn with a lower grade gasoline, which is what these rhinos are. You need to actually take it out. And when it comes to the institutions, I think we need to, look at, what industries are we looking at? When it's information industry, these Daily Wire alternatives to CNNs are doing really well. So maybe it's change over there. But for something like education, that seems like it might need to be a system that just burns down completely. And the way we view current day education just needs to end, and we need to go somewhere else when we, like the Ember that we're talking about right now, and something rises from the ashes, hopefully something a lot better. And that might be what need to happen in some of these industries. And it's scary because we don't want to give up a good education, right? We don't want a generation of kids losing out on that, but we kind of already are. We just had a whole year right now where kids did not get an education almost at all. And then
I would argue we've had 3 to 4 decades of kids not getting an education.
I'm educated.
Well, and like, I think that like education is a perfect example of this, because the education system is lost. It's done. There is no bringing it back. It would take at least probably 25 years to recover from what's been done, because the reality is that the teacher education programs are completely infiltrated with this crap. So not only would you need to train a new generation of teachers themselves, you would need to train a new generation of teacher educators. It's just not possible. The only answer to the education problem is to pull your kids out and homeschool them, or for other charter schools to like pop up that are more conservative leaning, or at least not doing this woke shit. That's the only thing that's going to fix it. And so that's pretty much already been sacrificed. That is not a winnable battle for us. So perhaps burning it to the ground and using that to illustrate what's happened, it could actually lead to something better being rebuilt.
Well, and on the topic of education, I think that's actually the best example of the need for an alternative institution. And here's what I mean by that. And where I say homeschooling is the answer at the K through 12 level, but when it comes to higher ed, here's the issue we have with the education system: is a degree is a sorting mechanism, and it's a form of credentialing. And there are some areas, I think, whenever people talk about autodidacts or learning, you can learn all this stuff on the internet, those types of things. That's correct in some areas, but let's go to Harvard, for example. And it used to be if someone had a degree from Harvard, we would say they know what they're doing, they're a productive member of society. whatever, but now it's which degree. Because if they have a medicine degree, then it's, well, they're probably still indoctrinated in some of this stuff, but hopefully they're at least a competent neurosurgeon, hopefully for now. But if they have a degree in gender studies, we know they're not just incompetent. They don't just not know things. They're actively going to be harmful to any institution that hires them. But the problem is we still have to have a credentialing mechanism for neurosurgeons. We still have to have a credentialing mechanism for, chemical engineers and all these, and the people that build society, the high skill fields that society depends on to keep functioning. We have to have an institution that teaches those skills competently and can credential and let us know who are the competent people to do that. And right now, the only credentialing mechanism we have is the institutions that are captured. And so we have to have institutions that do that, but also don't create activists. And so we have homeschool, yes, but we need some non-woke med schools, and law programs and whatever else, petroleum engineers or whatever, programming, anything in STEM. We have to have the institution STEM. We need real competency there. It's a hard science. And so that's where I say we definitely need new institutions, because PragerU and homeschooling and all that other stuff is good to a certain extent, but it's not going to give us the next generation of oncologists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How horrifying would it be if the last thing you heard before going under the knife in a major surgery was like, I believe in racially equitable outcomes, like that? Yeah. Terrifying. I mean, we definitely need to build up against that. So, but yeah, education is one that is at the forefront of what we need to look at, because without that, we are not preparing kids. I mean, this younger education, we're not preparing kids for reality. We're preparing them for some LARP competition where they're going to be fighting imaginary dragons called, racism, because it's out there somewhere. And you create activists who believe they already know this thing. And the difference between an educated person and an activist, the educated person is going to look at the world and being like, all right, if some bad things happen, maybe there's racism in there. And the activist is like, there's racism in there. Let's figure out how it's in there. Right. And we cannot sustain a society when we have people thinking that way.
Yeah.
James, were you going to say something? No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is very much kind of why I came up with the idea of Ember, just this type of discussion. And I'm thinking, at least in my mind, a lot of this was inspired by research I did into the cycles of empires. And one thing that I came across was a lot of empires, as they get to the end, they will fall apart. Some will just kind of remain as existing countries, kind of like how the UK still is a thing, even though they're not like the massive global British Empire anymore. But then other times they could renew and become brand new types and basically revive themselves as a new type of empire. The Roman Republic fell, but then the Roman Empire came out of it. And one of the big things that I think needs to be done is that we need to kind of create, at least in my mind, the US seems like it's on a path where it's either going to slowly be that frog boiling slow death, and I think that's the worst possible outcome, because if that happens, then we're going to be gone and no one's even going to realize it. And that's,
you bet your ass China and Russia will realize it.
Oh no, they'll realize it, but no one in the US will realize it. And then on the other hand, if there is that fiery end, if there is that blaze, then something can be created out of that. And that's why I think if that type of thing happens, if there is that fire, then we might get people who know a lot about politics but don't necessarily want to get invested in it, to feel like I have no choice. And the thing is, those people who feel like they have no choice, who they feel like it is a civic duty of theirs to get in, those are the people who really need to be in. Like, I feel like people like us, people like Dave Rubin, a lot of us who are, we look at it, we discuss it, we build up sort of this intellectual discussion about it and think about the principles. Like, our representatives don't do that, and that is a massive problem. So honestly, if things need to get so insane that people like us actively get involved, maybe Kevin, even on like a smaller scale, you might join a school board because you're sick of your kids getting this horrible education and getting indoctrinated in this way. Like, that's going to be you getting more civically involved, more doing this. And I think, well, if that's happening right now, what's gonna fall on us to do if things get worse? And do we need it to get worse to motivate people like us to actually take on these office positions? And to an extent, I think that is necessary. And I'm going to use a really bad reference now that people aren't going to like. But if you look at how, like, when the Nazi Party took over Germany, basically after, I believe it was the Treaty of Versailles from the First World War, Germany took on the entire bill. They ended up going into hyperinflation. They were utterly destroyed. But by doing that, the Nazis came in. They said, okay, we are a new country. We are not that country. We are going to build ourselves back up. And when they did that, they ended up becoming so powerful they almost took over the world, which no. Very funny, Truman. I am not doing this to say anything good about the Nazis. What I am saying is that there is an amount of civic action that does not happen until the fire is lit. And one of the things we need to worry about is that if we're not careful, there might accidentally be a lit fire that will cause a party that is as insane as the Nazis to come up in the US, because everyone's going to be in such a terrible position. They will accept anyone who is willing to get them out of it. And we don't want that to happen. That is the last possible thing that anyone in the US would want to happen. And yet that is something that we could be on the path of.
Yeah, and I think as coming from the conservative standpoint, the traditional way that someone like me would vote is I vote for the candidate who's least interested in politics. I vote for the candidate who does not want to do anything. You know, the best times in government for me is when it's through a temporary government shutdown, because it means nothing's getting done. And that is where a lot of these conservatives, Republicans are coming from. But it comes a point where we have to start to actually vote in people who are willing to, again, fight and actually be active in government, which is kind of counterintuitive for us. But, you know, like you said, if you keep voting in these people who are okay with cutting taxes and that's it, eventually there's going to be a burning point in which people are actually going to start voting in pretty awful people.
Yeah, I think what you said, James, is really correct about having to return to, we need reluctant leaders. And Donald Trump, it seemed like, was that. Obviously, he had his ego and everything. But the point I always make is he was a rich dude going into office, and he knew that whenever he left office, he would just go back to being a rich dude. You know, in the Sunday special that Ben Shapiro did with Jared Kushner, Kushner made multiple references to, really wish he would have done this or done this later, because we had all these business ventures that we had to stop doing, and we were about to have some really profitable things going, and we had to stop doing them. You know, you could tell Kushner wasn't real happy with it, because he lost money, and him and Ivanka lost money. And, you know, whatever you think about the policies of Donald Trump or the personality of Donald Trump or any of those things, the fact there is something to be said for that he made his living not as a politician, and he got to go back to doing that. In other words, his life happiness or, you know, or anything like that wasn't, you know, solely rooted in his success as a politician. And we don't have reluctant leaders anymore. You know, George Washington, you know, people say, oh, you're going to compare Trump to George Washington. I don't care if they say that, but George Washington, they wanted to make him king, and he said no. and he was kind of reluctant to even run for office. He almost didn't even seek a second term. He was considering not pursuing a second term. He ended up doing it. And he worried that if he died in office, this is why he didn't do a third term, that if he died in office, then it would set a precedent, that would be dangerous. And so he wanted it. Back then, it was assumed that you would do this as, like you said, James, a civic duty. And then you'd go back to being a farmer or blacksmith or, whatever, a banker, whatever it is you did. That, they didn't live there. They didn't live in Washington. They would be at home, and then they would go and do their thing. And, after they do the politics thing, and then they'd go back. And so the rise of politics as a lifelong vocation is really the one of the things that makes this so complicated and difficult to do. I think it's probably no coincidence that every president after Washington followed his lead in only doing 2 terms until the
FDR.
Progressive savior, FDR, right? That's the rise of progressivism and the New Deal and the big government kind of stuff came from, these people here who were like, keep us in power forever, politics for life. I'm not saying there weren't Republicans that did that too at this point, not at all. But the idea that there are reluctant leaders and we need that, I think is absolutely correct and a good observation. But the problem is, and that I think I've actually heard Dave Rubin say this, and it's true, sane people don't want to be in politics. You have sane people understand, I'm not qualified for this. No one's qualified for this. And so what you end up with are the people who actually think they're qualified to do it, who actually think they, in other words, the people who want power are probably the people who shouldn't have power. Thomas Sowell quote, people who enjoy meetings shouldn't be in charge of anything. And so that's the problem that we run up with is that, we don't really have reluctant leaders because, back to that consequences thing, the reluctant leaders saw it as their civic duty because they understood there were negative consequences if they didn't. And they felt it as a weight of responsibility. And they felt it was a burden. There's I'm willing to do this because I understand what happens if people like me don't do it. And so way back to the beginning of what you brought up, Karlyn and James, I think also with consequences, maybe that's what's required, to your point, James, about that fire, maybe being some kind of catalyst for people to understand, okay, if not people like me, or, I'm not saying me, but people who have the idea, if not for people like me, then this is what happens. And so, reluctant leaders emerge, maybe, I don't know, but we don't have that anymore. I think Trump was an example of that kind of, but he's an anomaly.
Yeah, and to the credit for that, I read through George Washington's inauguration speech. For those who haven't seen the video I did where I read through speeches, and and the funny thing is his initial inauguration speech is him basically complaining about the fact that he wants to be retired and he should be enjoying his sunset years, and instead his entire nation is coming and asking him to come do this, and he's just throwing up his arms and saying, well, I guess now I gotta do this. Thanks. I want to be retired, but I guess I'll come do this.
Humble brag.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. Even when that happens, because I've had so many people tell me to run for office, I cannot even tell you. But the reality is that the Republican Party in my state does not want me to run for office. Who the Republican Party wants to run for office is the same guy that lost 2 years ago when Donald Trump was on the ticket, the guy who will not speak out publicly against critical race theory, the guy that will not take any public position on anything. And it's actually funny because I've had people offer to connect me with this person privately so that he can assure me on a one-on-one phone call that he's really opposed to critical race theory, but will not make any public position. And I said, no, not interested. So they do not want people like me. They do not want reluctant people to run for office. The Republican Party is only going to support exactly the candidates they want to support. And so I go back to yeah, this is a great idea that these people who don't really want to run for office, they should be the ones running for office. They're not going to get elected. They're not even going to have a hope of getting elected. And
Not yet.
I think, well, no, but this is the point is we have a limited amount of time to fix this problem. And I do not believe that that people like me are going to get elected. Mostly, I do think there's going to be one season, two season, 2022. I do. But I think for the most part, it's going to be the same old people that have been there before, that have the blessing of the on-high Republican Party, who is completely out of touch with their voters. They're going to be people who are not going to fight for issues that the voters care about. They're going to be people who stab the voters in the back. So this is a wash at this point. And I think that we can idealize these situations all that we want. But again, I come back to the fact that I don't think continuing to support the Republican Party in what they're doing in any way is a viable path forward. I think it's going to make us feel like we might be on the right team because we're opposing the greater evil. But that team is not going to win this battle in the way that things currently are. And I think that the very best thing that we can hope for is to maybe shake them to their core in 2022. Change my mind.
Yeah, well, honestly, I think that we're in a position where we might have to accept that loss. We might be in a position we might be in a position where it is too late to do anything about the adoption of CRT. But if we accept, CRT. But if we accept that, okay, there's going to be losses. There's going to be some big losses. But in 10 years, we can have a sweep of people who are willing to actually put in the work to undo past damage, which the Republicans never do, then there is actually a hope. There is actually a thing. We might lose for now, but that loss might be temporary. That's the thing. That's what we need to consider. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of damage, and it's going to affect an entire generation or more that damage is going to be felt. Mm-hmm. But if we do not either transform the Republican Party with a party that is willing to take action and undo past damage, then we are never going to be in a good place. We're always going to be, as you were saying, Truman, they're always meeting them halfway. They're always shifting. Like if Democrats are at 10, Republicans are coming at 0, they're going to always meet them at 5. Republicans are always going to be the ones shifting, and they're never going to be saying, actually, I want to be -5. They're never going to do that. They're never going to say that. And you can even see this in the constituents. I've talked with plenty of Republicans, like, what about Obamacare? It's like, well, my kid now gets to stay on my insurance until they're 26, and that's really good. So no, I don't really want to get rid of it. Okay, what about Social Security numbers? I mean, that's so creepy? The government's keeping numbers. It's just like, well, how else would they know who people are to tax them? Just like, I don't know. They did it for decades before Social Security numbers existed. And now they're just tracking you. So like, what about all the NSA stuff? It's like, no, we need them to protect us from the terrorists. What about the Patriot Act? No, they're keeping us safe. What about the Federal Reserve? Oh, well, we need the Federal Reserve to protect our money supply, to protect our
keep interest rates low.
Yeah, to keep interest rates low, to be able to make sure that inflation doesn't either go out of control or that deflation happens. It's just like, so you love basically every left and Democrat policy for the past 100 years that has specifically hurt the American people. Yep. Yes. Just like, okay, you're a progressive. That's what I end up telling people.
But I like the Second Amendment, and I'm against abortion. So therefore I'm on the other side.
Like, yeah, no, I like, the point is like, we need to start having people, and we need to start having representatives stand up and actually call this shit out as being bad. Yeah. Like,
how do you do that when it's not incentivized? There's no incentive to do it. How do you do it?
Well, there's two things there.
And
I think, sorry, go on, James.
Well, I was going to say, like, it's going to have to be a bit bullet. Like, there's going to be people, we need people who are willing to run for office and are willing to lose time after time after time again while trying to build a platform probably utilizing one of the major parties, like the Republicans, and getting up on a stage and saying, and every election cycle, primary this person and say, here are the things that the Democrats have done that this person is now accepting, that this person is now compromising on, and is putting inside of our schools, inside of our creating institutions, creating more taxes for us, more debts for our children that we are never going to be able to pay off, that they are never going to be able to pay off. Here is what this person is doing that is destroying our country. And they're going to need to do that election after election after election after election. And the thing is, most people are not willing to do that. And I would say that until we get to that fire burning under your ass until like you can't sit down, it's not going to happen. And the thing is, so many people are happy with the boiling frog as it is. Like, they're just not jumping out of the pot because the heat has not been turned up. We need to let the heat get turned up, I think. And we need to come back and say, this is what happens, and here's everything that led up to it.
Yes. So what you're talking about, so there's two things there. We have to have people waiting in the wings that are effectively I told you so's. You can't have I told you so moments if you're not telling them so along the way.
Exactly.
And so having those people are crucial. And we do have some examples of this, of them pushing back and winning in some cases. So for the Republicans, I think it was in the 90s. I think maybe Newt Gingrich was in the House leader or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they shut down the government and said, we're not going to budge until you balance the budget. And Bill Clinton balanced the budget. He had to. That's one example, but that was 2.5 decades ago, right? Another example of someone who I think is kind of an I told you so type person is like a Ron Paul type, who they've been around. They've won in some ways, at least in Kentucky, right? And that where Rand Paul's from, or both of them are from, but they're there, and it's I told you so. There's always, in movies, there's often times that they go and seek out the hermit who is exiled, who is right about this stuff all along to kind of, help guide people, through different things. And so I think there needs to be that. So there has to be people, there's this theme in the Bible of prophets, and that every time a prophet comes in the Old Testament, the people they're warning about an impending disaster that is a result of the people's actions. And they're there to be the person that the people look to. They never avoid the disaster. That's my point. They never avoid the disaster, but they are there for the people to look to after disaster happens to explain it and say, I told you so. Here's the right thing to do. That's the role that those prophets serve. That's why a lot of times they're persecuted. Prophet's not welcome in his own town, but they serve the role as you have no excuse for what happened because you were warned, you were told. And then after the bad thing happens, then they come back to them and say, what do we do? Lead us, help us, figure this out. And so I'm not saying that we need modern day conservative prophets. It's just an example or a metaphor. But the point is that we can't have I told you so moments if we're not telling them so loudly, often, regularly, persistently, belligerently, maybe in some cases. To have those, and another example of that would be, that's where those other institutions come from. And you have those people and the other institutions waiting in the wings so that whenever the fire does get hot enough, they see, there is something there. It's not just crazies, that are there to try and receive the people that are looking for answers. So that we have the people who it's like, yeah, I've been saying this for years, I told you. And so we see this with people today, there are intellectuals that were older intellectuals that didn't get any attention at the time, but today we pay a lot of attention to, or at least people in our circles pay a lot of attention to, like a Hoffer or a Hayek, or a Milton Friedman, whatever, even someone like Herbert von Mises, you're talking about Karlyn. I think that was his name. It's von Mises. I thought his first name was Herbert, but that maybe at the time weren't accepted or that might have sounded like a kook, but now we look at it and go, okay, they were right about those things. We need contemporary versions of that are ready to go for whenever that shit does, burn down. And yeah, I guess that's my point. You can't have I told you so moments if you're not telling them so.
Ludwig von Mises.
Ludwig, yeah.
Ludwig.
Yeah.
Say his book is right there. I'm like, there's another popular von Mises in engineering, so I get screwed up too.
All right, so we're starting to get up on close to 2 hours conversing here, so maybe time to wrap it up. But so like the last question I kind of want to ask now that we've been debating this for the last couple hours is, so what is the solution for 2022? Do we, because this is the, you know, the thing that we have upcoming in what, like a year and a half, we're going to have another election. Well, I would personally like to see the Republicans at least take back the House, so there is some kind of stopgap to at least prevent some of the more crazy nonsense from coming through. Like, what if the Republicans are going to continue on this path of being feckless cowards that only are interested in guns and abortion? Then what do we do in 2022? Is the responsible thing to continue to vote for the cowards, or is the responsible thing to use that election as a wake-up call to remind them that they didn't automatically earn everyone that voted for Donald Trump in 2020? What do you think?
So for me, I would say the initial response should be, if you're in a district where someone is primarying one of those coward Republicans, one of the compromise only or compromise always Republicans, I would say, if you're in a district with one of them and there is someone else primarying against them, support the person primarying against them. Support the new blood who is willing to come in and make the difference and make the changes that need to be done, and who has studied and knows about this stuff. If there is one of those candidates in your district, find them, promote them, do everything you can. Talk to your friends about them. Tell them, hey, this person is way better than that other person. And tell them, yo, we gotta like get together. If you have friends like who are in the same party as you, even if they're not in the same party, if they would even consider looking at this person, throw a party and talk about it. Throw a party and like make a part of the, like, have like stuff that promotes this person at the party. You don't even need to make it like the party themed about it, but just like have merch laying around or something, like something that will make people ask questions. Well, what's this? What is that? Who is this person? Why do you have this? You want people to ask questions about this, and getting people to ask questions is the only way you can ever get people to have an answer, to learn an answer, because you're not going to convince people that they're wrong. You're not going to be able to go into an interaction with people and tell them how to think. But if you can get people to ask you what to think or what you think, that is where the power lies. That is where you can turn a conversation into something. You got to turn it from, you got to make people also, and you also need to make people feel validated in it. When you're bringing stuff up with this, and the people are thinking, you don't want people to say, oh, you're right, that's a better candidate. You need to people say, this is what the candidate's about. And they need to say, that is right. There's a subtle difference there between people saying, oh, you're right. That's basically them hand waving you off. But if they say that's right, if you're reaching something inside of them, they're going to say, that's right, that's something I believe in. And now they've got that attachment.
Okay,
so that's very important to build up.
I want to come in with a clarification on my question, because I really want to push all of you to a decision-making point in this question. Yes, I think that we can 100% agree that if there is a chance to primary a feckless coward Republican, then that person should be primaried. Let's just say we have got into the general election and the rhino makes it through. The primary fails because the Republican Party are cowards and they only vote for the person who they think they has name recognition. You have a choice between a feckless coward Republican and a Democrat. What do you do?
Screw them.
Let it burn.
Let it burn. I'm serious. We the only places where Republicans should be picking up seats this next election should be with the ones who are going to be actually doing stuff. We need the party to see that the winners are the new blood, the people who are actually going to do the things and stand up for what we believe in and push back against these freaking leftist ideologies. It has to be the people who are going to move us closer towards our traditional values and principles, and not the people who are always compromising with the people pulling us away from them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, in my opinion, is the best way to fight back against any of this is more at the local level. The nice part about the local level is they're the most accessible politicians to you. You can actually email them. You can go to their office. You can call them and actually push them on a policy position that you don't think they're clear on. If they're not clear publicly on CRT and there's like, I believe in you, but I'm not going to really say this thing publicly, don't say, I'm not going to vote for you. You actually have to make your position clear, or you're not going to vote for that person. When it comes to feckless Republicans, I don't remember who came up with this phrase, but I think Michael Knowles is someone who says this a lot, that if Trump were to pass away, that he should donate his brain to science and his spine to the Republicans. And it is something, it's like, this is a guy, whether you agree with him or not, whether you're a Trump guy or not, something you got to learn from, and it is to have a spine, to say what you mean in public, so people can know that this is what you're going to do. And if you don't do that thing, you're going to be held accountable next election cycle. So the thing is, make them call out, they call a spade, right? You have to call this out for what it is. And if they're not willing to do that publicly, say, all right, you don't have my vote anymore. And I'm a life, in my position, I could say I'm a lifelong Republican. And this might be the first time I'm not voting Republican, because you are not taking a courageous position like you should as a public figure, standing up for your constituents, because this is what your constituents want. And this is what they're looking for in their policymaker.
Mm-hmm. Truman?
I don't think, Kevin, did you answer the question of whether, if you would vote, what you would do in that situation?
Yeah. Well, I think I did. If they're going to call it out publicly, I would vote for the person. If they don't call it out publicly, I wouldn't. I'd vote third party or whomever is going to stand up the most, or even abstain from voting. Because if they have to lose in 2022 to get the message, that is what happens. And I don't want that to happen. Worst case scenario for me is losing in 2022 and giving a power hungry federal government, more space to intrude on our rights. But you have to learn somehow, and this is the best way to encourage reform, I guess, within the Republican Party and grow a spine.
Right, and Ron Paul.
Yeah, I have my own problems with Ron Paul, but I get you.
So this is interesting. So I have I disagree with all of you. I would vote for the person, but people, I think we are in a different kind of position. And what I mean is so in the hypothetical, we maybe were at least somewhat active or vocal in trying to primary this person out, right? And so that means we had a candidate that we were supporting who didn't win, who we think is a good candidate. In that situation, that candidate's probably going to endorse the person who they lost to. And what I will say is that if someone says, I didn't vote because my person didn't get in, like, let's say there was a Republican this last time around. I know some of these people. I'm sure you guys do too, who said, I just couldn't vote for Donald Trump, or he didn't do such and such a thing. And so I couldn't vote for him. I don't think that wins votes. I don't think that wins people to your side, because that alienates the people on your side. Because they're like, because the answer is, wait, so you'd rather this fucking guy be in? Are you serious? And so I think that we have to do both. And what I mean is I'm picturing a thing in my mind where people like us who have a platform and maybe we're part of the thing that lost, getting up and saying loudly, I'm voting for you and I'm mad as hell about it. I don't want to vote for you. I don't think you're qualified to do this. I don't think you're well suited. I don't think you have my best interest in mind or anybody else's best interest in mind. But it's between someone who I think is going to suck at their job and someone who I think is going to be actively harming people. And that's my choice. So I have to pick you. And I hope that people see what I see, which is that you are not good. You are not good at this, and that you're going to fail. And so maybe next time such and such candidate does get your ineffective ass out. And to make it known that I'm going to vote for you, but I'm fucking mad about it, that this is the only option. I heard Brett and Heather Weinstein say something similar about the mayoral race in Portland in just an episode the other day. They're like, we had to choose between Ted Wheeler and an Antifa sympathizer. Like we had to vote for Ted Wheeler because there's no other alternative. And we damn sure don't want the Antifa sympathizer in it. And so I think there's a way to make it where the crazies, at least to try to stave them off. But again, you can't have I told you so moments if it's not, I'm telling you so, but I think there's a way to do both, where we can loudly say, I am not happy about this, and make predictions. I mean, that's the thing Scott Adams says, right? To make predictions to test your worldview and your hypothesis. So say, here's what's going to happen if this person gets in. Here's what they've done every time they've been in. Let's say it's a person who's getting reelected, who's always won or something like that. Say, here's what they're going to do. And if you're happy with this, that's fine. But they don't give a damn about you. They're not protecting our kids in schools. They're not protecting this. They're not doing this. And I'm pissed that I have to vote for them. So that's what I would do in that situation. Is I would vote for them, but I would make it well known, no buts about it, that I wasn't happy about it, that I thought they were a failure of a candidate, that I hope they prove me wrong, but that I don't think they will, and that I hope that their failure wakes up more people next time, so we're not stuck in a position having to vote for some impotent, feckless, coward, establishment rhino person. That is how I would handle that.
And just, to clarify something you said, Truman, I didn't vote for Trump and he won my vote. I think there's a lot of people that were in my position who did not think he was good enough. And now, granted, this is a different position than not voting for someone and they lose and learning from that. But I do think that even not voting for them and they win, and it's still.
I'm saying in 2020, people that didn't vote for him in 2020 that were claimed to be conservative because they were.
Yeah, but they're just liberals anyways. They're reformed to liberalism, or not liberalism. I wish liberalism.
TDS. I think there's TDS conservatives, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it should be any surprise where I'm going to sit on this. Not only am I not going to vote for the feckless coward Republican, I'm going to do everything I can to help put energy into getting a third party to rise in this scenario, to have another alternative. And the reason for that is that I think that the Republican Party really, it's very simple at the end of the day. They only understand consequences. They only understand consequences. And I think
they
Truman,
face none.
And they face absolutely none. And I think voting for the candidate, even if you're doing what Truman says and say, I hate you, I don't think you're going to be a good candidate, I'm doing this begrudgingly, I think what that candidate is going to do is say, hey, thanks for your vote, appreciate it. And they're going to
the hypothetical didn't have a third party candidate option. So I agree with you. We have to have, if we can do that, that's fine. But if at the end of the day, there isn't one, if there isn't a third party.
I don't even care if there isn't a third party option. I would simply either decline to vote in that race entirely, or I would write someone in. I don't really even care, because I think that they need to understand that they do not get to have those voters. We do not go to them by default, because I really think that right now they believe that I was actually just talking with someone about this yesterday. She said to me, the Republican Party has 10 million more people in 2020 than they did in 2016. And I said, no. The Donald Trump got 10 million more people. The Republican Party did not. And I think that they're not realizing the difference between those two things. And I think the only way they realize the difference is if they lose.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah, it's a critical distinction. And I don't think many of them are seeing that, because they're not really paying attention. And so I think that it's not only about personally, I don't like this candidate. It's almost like we have a responsibility to force them to change. They are not going to do it on their own. They're conservatives. They've shown us that they're not going to do it on their own. They refuse to provide a vision for this country. They refuse to provide any argument about why they're better for voters. They're no amount of cajoling or prodding is going to get them to do it. So now they need to lose, and they need to lose to the worst possible opponent, which is the Democratic Party, which is trying to destroy this country. And if we have to lose for a couple of years to burn the damn system to the ground, or at least elicit some sort of strategic response from someone, I would much rather.
Am I the only one that she's paused for?
Okay,
No.
okay.
Oh, yeah.
She's there, all of us.
How funny would it have been if James and I both just went,
I'm alone.
Boy. Not me.
I want to say something about what she just said there. I think Karlyn is right that they do need to lose. The one thing I would say is it's not a given. Not every race is a close race. In some places, it's guaranteed a Democrat's going to win, or a Republican's going to win. I live in a state where a Republican's going to win, right? So my vote abstention is irrelevant. And so that's where I'm saying, having that out there, of saying here's what's going to happen and here's why, and to have so that you can have the I told you so moment, at least in a way that's productive, not in a way that's cynical or antagonistic, is necessary, because not every race is a 50-50 split where if enough people stay home, the Republican's going to lose. So you got to have an answer in the places where a Republican's going to win no matter what. That would be one of the distinctions that I would make there.
Yeah, there are certainly kind of caveats to saying, all right, I'm gonna not vote for this Republican because it's better for them to learn. If their opposition is, an open Marxist, I would probably vote for just about any Republican at that point, right? So there are nuances to this discussion, I think, but I do think it's important. And I would say, you asked me this question 2 months ago, Truman, I'm 100% on your end to be like, I'm voting the farthest red no matter what, but trying to give them a piece of my mind. But the problem is a piece of my mind, it doesn't seem to resonate with at least the Rhino sect of the Republican Party. And that's why, and I think it's interesting how you guys brought up the Trump party as opposed to the Republican Party. And there's 70 plus million people who voted for Trump, not the Republicans. I think that is a pretty useful distinction. And so I'm always scared. I'm still one of those conservatives who's tentative toward I'm going to let the Republican become the party of Trump, just because I don't like the idea of making an ideologue of a person. I'm very, I don't know. I just don't like that idea. But if this is the label we have to throw on it to change minds and actually have some of the Republicans wake up to the damaging things they do when they don't fight for anything. Again, when you become the party that the only principle you stand for is cutting taxes, that's not going to help, because cutting taxes only works when you cut spending, and they don't believe in the second half of that idea. Yeah. So you're going to run into a problem there.
Oh yeah, geez, pretty much every Republican since Nixon has increased our debt tremendously. Faster.
Reagan increased the debt.
Yep.
Reagan, I think,
and he's like
at a huge rate, more than any of his predecessors.
Every time it's been more. Every single time it's been more. And it's just it's absurd. It's truly absurd. But honestly, if I was in a position of voting for a feckless Republican or letting a Marxist Dem get in, I would freaking just write in a Republican who actually has a spine and tell the party, suck it up. I will let the fire burn for 2, 4, 6 years, just so that at the end of it, we can come back and they'll actually take it seriously.
Well, you have to calculate those risks, because they're the saying "cutting off your nose to spite your face" exists for a reason. And one of the things, my dad taught me growing up, he said, you can be right, but you can be dead right. In other words, you can be right in a way that doesn't matter because, of the harm that was done. And so I think that has to be taken into consideration. It is just as naive. The Republicans that think if they just vote for people who say the right things about abortion and guns, and that's good enough, that's a naive position. I think it's just as naive to say we have unlimited elections to hand to nut jobs before people wake up. And once we get our people in, we'll be able to undo the damage. That's a very naive perspective as well. And so I think we just have to be realistic about it. That's, why the stuff when I said about like what Brett was trying to do with the unity thing, I don't think it was realistic. I appreciated what he was doing. And I think anything that shines a light on the growing amount of disaffected people is good. Shines a light on the fact that the establishment duopoly is poisonous, I think is good. But we do have to be realistic about these things. And that is one place where the left is more logical than the right. Again, they circle the wagons when they have to. And then they worry about the infighting once they have power. Here's the deal about infighting. It doesn't matter if you're out of power. What are you fighting over? What are you fighting over? Like what we would do if we had power? It makes more sense to have that fight when there's actually an outcome to it, And the reality is, take someone like Bernie Sanders, who's played the long game. Bernie Sanders has lost so many elections and been laughed, out, but he stuck around and has made the concessions where he needed to in his party, and he has incrementally grown his coalition and grown people to his perspective. I just think that that's a much better route and that the people on the left understand that. They understand that, that, at the end of the day, this is a numbers game about acquiring power to implement what you want to see happen. And so you have to do those things. And in order to actually, these conversations are meaningless if you don't have a way to implement it. You don't have a way to implement it if you don't have the votes. And
I think I'm kind of between both of you, James, to take the extreme example. The scorched earth example, I think, is a really, really bad idea. That's just not good. You don't know what's going to be burning. I think, just like Ayn Rand, that to me, that's a bit moving toward the Ayn Randian type idea that you just go off into Galt's Gulch and let the world burn until they ask you to come back. The interesting thing about the stories is none of those people have kids. You don't want to see scorched earth when your kids are in the public education system. That's a bit scarier when I think you have skin in the game like that. But what we need to hopefully do, and I think what happens sooner rather than later, is reform. Right? There's this idea that if DC becomes the 51st state, that the Republicans will never win another election again. Well, that doesn't make any sense. The Republicans wouldn't just keep the same policy preferences and become an unviable party. They would reform into a more viable party. And now that would make probably a worse Republican Party. So it wouldn't be good, because when it comes to reform, they can either reform towards something like CRT and think it's such a popular idea that it's something we should adopt, or understand a vast majority of people who actually understand CRT are way against it, and to actually, grow a spine and stand against it. So that's the type of reform that hopefully we can have. And that, to me, if they lose in 2022, I think they would kind of get it at that point. And I don't think you'd have to have decades of Republican losses to get the point across to them.
Yeah. Well, also, first, welcome back, Karlyn.
Sorry, my internet crashed as I was making a point, but I think I got my general gist across.
yeah, I think we got most of it. But yeah, my main issue is I continuously see the Republicans, every time that they're in need of a reform, I see them going more and more into adopting more and more left policies. I see them always using the left as the base. And honestly, I would rather see the right just get utterly crushed, even if like Marxists got in, just because I think I would rather have the fire pop up than have the feckless ones who are just slowly boiling the frog to that point anyways. Because if they slowly boil the frog to that point, there isn't going to be the opposition to it. It's just it's going to end up, as the generations die off, it'll just slowly, like, our kids will be more susceptible to it. Their kids will be even more susceptible to it, on and on and on.
Well, and to be frank, it actually could be a good thing if there got more and more like far left people in the federal government, because what that could end up doing is pushing more people to congregate around different states. Like, it could push more people from the Libertarians to come to New Hampshire. It could push more people to Florida or any of these other conservative states, which would really get more people into local government to organize on that level, rather than relying on the federal government to do everything. I mean, maybe that is the only way to drive the geographic shift that I think is already starting to happen anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible, though. I will say here in Florida, we do have some issues with a lot of people coming in from New York, and they are coming in immediately saying, "Oh, we want a state income tax." Which, like, DeSantis nearly lost to a guy who wanted to institute a 10% state income tax. He won by like 0.1%, 0.2% or something like that. It was a very close marginal race. And now we've got all these people fleeing these failing states, coming to Florida for security. And they're trying to bring their policies with them immediately, because they don't see the correlation between their state failing and the policies that they enacted. This is the whole consequences issue.
I'll say left doesn't understand consequences either. The left doesn't understand the consequences either. I mean, Ted Wheeler doesn't remain in power. Andrew Cuomo doesn't remain in power if the left understood consequences. Karlyn, when you crashed, one of the points I made, about what I would do in that voting situation was that there are some cases where an election is going to go a certain way no matter what. So I live in a red state. A Republican's going to win no matter what. So my vote abstention, it, you know, might matter in a place where it's close. Here, it's not. Here, I think it's more about making the point. And maybe in that case, maybe that's an even better argument to say I'm not going to vote, because like, well, the Republican's going to win anyway. So you don't have my vote. You need to earn my vote. And I hope enough people next time, you know, realize that you don't automatically get our vote just because you say these things.
I think better than abstention, we should like, for anyone who would abstain on, I think it might be a good idea to have like a list of Republicans, even if they're not even in your county or in your district or whatever. Just have a list of ones from all over who like really symbolize what you believe in and write them in.
I agree.
Did I read that quote last time we talked about that conservatism is the shadow of radicalism? Did I read that in our last conversation, or was that something else?
You've talked to me about that before, but I don't know if it was a live conversation or just.
So can I read this quote that
I'm curious. Man. Go for it.
Yeah, I probably did that, Kevin. It may be inferred again that this present movement will certainly prevail from the history of its only opponent, Northern conservatism. This conservatism is a party which never conserves anything. Its history has been that it demurs to each aggression of the Progressive Party and aims to save its credit by a respectable amount of growling, but always acquiesces at last in the innovation. What was the resisted novelty of yesterday is today one of the accepted principles of conservatism. It is now conservative only in affecting to resist the next innovation, which will tomorrow be forced upon its timidity and will be succeeded by some third revolution to be denounced and then adopted in its turn. American conservatism is merely the shadow that follows radicalism as it moves forward towards perdition. It remains behind it, but never retards it, and always advances near its leader. And so that was a quote by a guy named Robert Louis Dabney in the late 1800s. And that, you know, when progressivism was rising. And so, you know, there's a reality to where that's been able to happen because they haven't faced consequences. So maybe, yeah, that conservatism being exposed for what it is, a losing philosophy, a losing ideology, especially when its opponent is progressivism, then yeah, then maybe. So Karlyn, you might have convinced me. You might have convinced me, I guess is my point. I don't know. I need to think about it, but. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have gone quite a bit of time this time. So I don't know. I think it's time to wrap it up. Any final statements?
Keep fighting.
Yeah.
We still have to keep fighting in some way. What you're talking about is fighting. It's a fight.
Yeah.
It's fighting for a third party, fighting for better candidates, fighting against the right whenever they're losing. Yeah, keep fighting.
Yeah, to me, it's like the conversation again I had with Deb. It's about being proactive. It's so easy as a conservative myself, and speaking to any other conservatives watching this right now, it's so easy to kind of sit back and being like, all right, well, I have my guns, I got my family in my house, you know, this is all I need. Well, unfortunately, with the overbearing government we have, it can come for you. So you have to be proactive in more things than just education, but in public service as well.
Yeah, I'm going to say, if you're in an area where you have representatives, and this goes for federal, local, all levels of government, if you have a representative and you feel like they're not doing the part of retarding the leftward pull and the damage from that, then be sure to support anyone who comes up who is saying that they are going to take the action to really undo the damage. Find those candidates, because they are out there, and there's a good chance that there will be one in your district who is out there, even if they're small. They are promoting a message of, I want to do stuff for the community. I want to take proactive act. I want to be proactive, take action, get things done, and make things appeal to these traditional American values. And they are not just giving the lip service. So look for those people, support them where you can. Again, like I said, get their gear or merch or whatever, get their like banner, have it in some very noticeable place in your house. And when you throw a party, make sure to just have it in a place where people will see it. You don't even need to make the party about it. Just have it in a place where people will see it and they'll ask, what is that?
Right. And my final thought is that sometimes the very best service that you can do to someone is to tell them no when they are only inflicting harm upon themselves. And I think that in a long-term strategic battle, it is better to lose a couple, or long-term strategic war, it's better to lose a couple of battles if it leads to long-term victory. And I really think that in the short term, telling the Republicans that they don't get our votes is a battle that we might need to sacrifice for the long-term strategic victory of turning the entire game around.
Yep. Can I add one little thing? Also final thought.
Yeah.
Local politics is not sexy. It's not interesting. I had the thought during this conversation that, okay, I'm gonna have to call and figure out the Republican office here or the Republican Party for my state to ask about, is there anyone opposing Liz Cheney? Right? Like we are so accustomed to thinking about things on the macro national level. Local politics isn't sexy. Running for school board isn't sexy. But that's where we have to start. Like that's where this comes from. Those are the fights that we can confront those people, those rhinos face to face, and ask them straight up, what's your position on this? What's your position on this? And so like, don't fall into the bystander effect of someone else will do it. Someone else will do it. Someone else will make that phone call. One of the ways that the radicals win is it only takes, no one is doing stuff. And so a handful of radicals can shape an entire school district or shape an entire state because they're the only voices there. And so Republicans can't fall into this bystander effect of just opting out because they assume people like us are going to do it. They have to take action at a local level, even just making phone calls, emailing people. That does make a difference.
All right.
Yeah.
That's all we've got. That's all she wrote for today.
Kids.
Do we want to see where people can find us?
Can we end it in an in memoriam of DMX or something like that?
No, that's probably a good suggestion, Truman. So if you want to get in touch with me, Karlyn Borysenko on YouTube, kb.locals.com is my locals community.
Cool. I'm Kevin from Engineering Politics. It's engineeringpolitics.locals.com, and you can find my stuff on Medium. I'm also on ThinkSpot, YouTube, Twitter, all the fun stuff.
All right. James there. You can find me at commutationconstruct.locals.com. I also have an individual YouTube channel, Commutation Construct. And yes, I will have the link so you guys won't have to write that out.
My name's Truman. I run the Return to Reason Locals community at returntoreason.locals.com. On YouTube, Return to Reason, Twitter, My Mundane Mind, also Medium, ThinkSpot, all those places. So come and check it out.
Cool. Well done, guys.
Guess that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one.
See you next time.
Peace out.
Peace.